want to play tag with the tractor? Your teachers would find it under very much.
Goodbye. Bye. He's going through the bump. There he goes through the gate.
In 2009, Council began research and consultation to identify the key challenges in sport for women and girls within Moreland.
The review identified several issues.
There was a serious lack of female competition and teams.
Only 8% of participants using council sports grounds were female.
To address this inequality, Council introduced a policy to encourage clubs to be more inclusive of women, juniors, people with a disability and people from culturally diverse communities, or risk losing an allocation of a ground to a club that is being inclusive.
Female participation has now increased by 161% in Moreland.
West Cobert Football Club is proud to align with Moreland's policy.
This year we successfully launched the club's first ever under-12 girls footy team.
We're changing our club.
We're changing our culture.
I'm changing the game.
So I'm Claire Johnston and I'm an accredited cricket bat maker and the first female in the world. I learnt how to make cricket bats from Ian Cullen. There's a lot of bats out there for men and I felt that there was an opportunity there to actually work with women to make better bats and to actually make them for their style. So recently I was commissioned to make 5 cricket bats for the Pascoe Vale Headfield Cricket Club for their under-13s girls cricket team. And to see their faces when they were given the cricket bats was just brilliant. So what I'd really love to be able to do is to keep working with my local community, the local cricket clubs, particularly the women, and work to make great cricket bats.
My name's Leslie. I have been with Moreland Family Daycare as an educator for over 36 years, I think. Family Daycare is a wonderful organisation. We look after children in our own home, they blend in with the family and it's fantastic.
I love Family Daycare.
I can choose my own hours, very flexible. I've made wonderful friendships with lots of the families. I'm now looking after children of the children I used to care for. The children just growing and developing.
Well, good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and our viewers live streaming tonight's meeting. My name's John Kavanagh and I'm the Mayor of the City of Moreland. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's meeting. Our meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and elders from other communities that might be with us this evening. I acknowledge that currently many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have made Moreland home and in doing so have contributed positively to the rich diversity of this municipality. Members of the gallery, please note that the council meeting is being recorded and web streamed live on council's website and Facebook. This recording will also be available as video on demand. Attendees are advised that they will be recorded during the meeting. Councillors are reminded that in line with the adopted Councillor Code of Conduct and Conduct Principles, councillors are to ensure that they conduct themselves at this meeting with integrity, impartially exercising their responsibilities in the interest of the local community and not improperly seek to confer or advantage any person. This behaviour will support the principles for leadership of good governance and secures public confidence in the office of councillor. I'd like to introduce the other councillors who are tonight. Councillor Sue Bolton, Councillor Anna-Olivia Carley-Hannon, Councillor Helen Davidson, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Natalie Abood. Hello. Councillor Dale Martin, Councillor Mark Riley, Councillor Lambros Tapanos and Councillor Oscar Yildiz. Officers in attendance tonight, to my left, your right, the Chief Executive Officer, Dr Norina De Lorenzo. Then we have, starting from the corner, we have Grant Thornton, who's the Director of City Infrastructure, Arden Joseph, the Director of Social Development, Sue Vitrovic, who's the Acting Director of Planning and Economic Development. We have Liz Rowland, who's the Acting Director of Corporate Services, Sally Curran, the Unit Manager of Governance, and Olivia Wright, the Manager of Property and Governance. And in the corner, not there at the moment, Anita Craven, the Executive Manager of Organisational Development. Councillors, I note that Councillor Farnley and Councillor Dorney are on approved leave of absence for tonight's meeting. I don't think there's any other councillors who are absent, and so there's no further apologies. Councillors, are there any interests or conflicts of interest? Councillor Abood.
Yes, I have a conflict of interest. I have an indirect interest with Notice of Motion 3918, investigation into feasibility of joint use library in Fawkner, including relocation of Fawkner Public Library into John Fawkner College Library, because it's called an indirect interest because of conflicting duties. I sit on the school council of John Fawkner Secondary College. So,
thank you, Councillor Bird. Are there any other conflicts to declare? Whilst not being a conflict, I'd like to take this opportunity to declare that I am intending to nominate as a councillor, as a candidate, I should say, for the state election in November 2018 for the seat of Pascoe Vale. While I'll continue to undertake my duties as a councillor in the lead-up, I am aware of the obligations of not to use council resources and support my election campaign. Once I'm formally nominated, I intend to take leave of absence from council until after the election day. I also note that I will see out my full mayoral term as a ceremonial meeting takes place on October the 29th, where the new election of the mayor takes place, and this is prior to the issuing of writs and prior to the opening of nominations. So that's for noting. Thank you. Are there any other councillors who would like to make a declaration?
I'm intending to, a bit late, but intending to nominate as a candidate for the state election in November 2018 in the state seat of Pascoe Vale. While I will continue to undertake my duties as a councillor in the lead-up, I am aware of my obligations not to use councillor resources to support my election campaign. Once I am formally nominated, I intend to take leave of absence from council until after the election day on November 24.
Thank you very much. Any other yes, councillor?
Third one. I am also intending to nominate as a candidate for the state election on November 2018 as the number 2 candidate on a ticket in the Northern Metropolitan Upper House seat. While I will continue to undertake my duties as a councillor in the lead-up, I'm aware of my obligations not to use council resources to support my election campaign.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolton. All right. Confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, could I have a motion for the adoption of minutes for the meeting held on the 6th of August, which was confidential, the 8th of August and the 13th of August, which was also a confidential meeting. Could I have a mover for the acceptance? Thank you, Councillor Yildiz, seconded by Councillor Davidson. Any discussion on those? Being no discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. We have minutes of reports from special committees. Tonight there are none. Petitions tabled by councillors. We don't have any on the agenda, but councillors, do you have any petitions to present? Okay, there being none. Is there any petitions in the public gallery? No, there are none. Thank you. All right, that takes us to question time. This is an opportunity for 30 minutes for citizens of Moreland to raise questions with councillors. I'd like to outline the process. Please note that if your question relates to a matter on any of the reports, this is the time to raise the question with us. Questions can be submitted online prior to the meeting, and a maximum of 2 questions is allowed per person, and questions that relate to the matter listed on the agenda will be dealt with first. When I invite you or your representative, you must ask the question without taking more than 2 minutes. A maximum of 3 questions will be heard on any one subject, and we'll proceed on to the next topic, and if time allows, we'll return to the previous topic. Either myself or another councillor will answer your question, or I'll ask the Chief Executive Officer to either provide a response or refer it to another council officer. If a response to your question is provided at tonight's meeting, there'll be no further formal response. However, council will action any commitments that's made in answering the question. Question time can only be extended for one 30-minute period and only for the purpose of responding to questions that relate on matters listed on the agenda. If your question cannot be answered, it will be taken on notice and a response between now and the next council meeting and will be in the governance report at the next council meeting. We have 30 minutes and the commencement time I'll put at 7:05 and we'll begin.
3.
Okay. We have Jason Clark, please.
Can I...
Yes? You'd like to ask one of the others first?
I'll go third.
Is that Sam, is it? Or, okay. So, which of those 3? Is it Hayley that would like to go first? Yeah. No worries. Thank you, Hayley.
Thank you, councillors and officers, for taking our questions. My question is with reference to the Bell and Moreland level crossing removal project, incorporated document and future consultation. Does council have the capacity to represent Moreland residents if the proposed design is unacceptable, not in line with local planning policies, or insufficiently represented at the next stage of consultation, given that the incorporated document provides exemptions from planning scheme requirements?
Okay, thank you for a specific question there. I might go to the Acting Director for that answer, because it does involve planning detail.
Through the Mayor. Hayley, thank you for your question. What I can advise is that no final design solution has been put forward by the LXRA, whether it's rail over or under. So Council will seek to influence the design in terms of whatever option is put forward and try and get the best possible outcomes for the community. And in relation to what they put on their website, they do say that they will share with the community the design that they do put out and information as to why the design was chosen. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. On the same topic, we have Zan.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors. My question is, does the council feel that adequate opportunity has been given for community consultation in the level crossing removal project, given that only 2.5 hour drop-in sessions were run by the LXRA, both in the same week and during school holidays, in a one-on-one format without the opportunity for the community as a group to hear and share questions and answers, that much of the community missed this opportunity. As one of a group of more than 150 concerned residents, I can attest that many were unaware of the sessions, and even that those registered with the LXRA mailing list were not emailed, and that the brochures with details of the sessions, dates and times were delivered not before but the week after the sessions were conducted. And that the planning scheme amendment draft document included important information previously not presented to the public in these sessions with regards to project area, including 4.1a, that additional level crossings could be included in the final designs, and therefore the people near to those crossings will have no time to consult. And perhaps most importantly, that the lack of design detail with regards to cost, timelines, provision of bike paths, development of vacant spaces, noise levels, privacy, etc., that's being offered to the public at this stage in the process is unacceptable, given that similar projects around Melbourne have already been completed, and that this lack impedes the community in making a fair and informed assessment of the impact of the different designs, the project and the outcomes. Will the council support a call for LXRA to extend community consultation to include further community consultation sessions with more effective notification methods and more detail of the final designs? And if not, why?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I suppose it's more of an opinion, this one, than a technical one. So, Councillor Riley.
Yeah, look, thank you for the question. As a councillor who works in this area of transport, as a councillor who works in the area of transport and infrastructure, I have great sympathy for your concerns, Anne, and obviously I presume you're living very close to the line itself, or
in the area.
So in that respect, I can't commit council to doing the last part of your question, which is that we'll do further consultation, partly because we don't have this is not our jurisdiction. We're a local council. The LXRA is a state government initiative, and it's being directed by the state government, and the Minister for Transport signs off on all of that. As a principle, this council is interested in getting the best consultation and engagement with our communities that we can have. We've demonstrated that at the last 2 meetings, although it's been, in terms of the accessible stops for trams, we've tried to ensure that we get those as well as good bike outcomes, and we wanted to have slightly better consultation around that. However, there's been some sort of twisting of the message about that in the last few days, which has been most unfortunate. So in any stage, I think we would want to be having good consultation, good engagement, and I'm sure if my colleagues who join with me would want to do that. I can't answer for them, but there's no motion. Sorry, there's no motion to that. The noise is distracting me. At this point, there are some motions on the table tonight, which we will consider, but it's hard for me to answer that we will actually do that, but as a principle, that's something that we would want to see. But I just think that you're here talking to the wrong level of government tonight. This is a state government issue. You've got local MPs, you've got upper house MPs, you've got a state transport minister, and to be truthful, my feeling is that that's where you need to be taking this message, and I would join with our communities to do that. It's our responsibility to do a lot of local government issues. Unfortunately, we don't run the upfield line. We've taken a strong stance of advocating for a whole-of-line solution to get really good outcomes for our community, and we've tried to do that in a way that brings the community with us. So I think we're all, as far as I feel, we're all on the same page with you, aren't we?
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Thank you very much. Thank you. Jason Clark, this is the third question on LXRA.
With respect, Councillor Riley, this is the same council that wanted to campaign against East West Link that doesn't even run through Moreland Council. So I'm not quite sure why we're picking and choosing, because the upfield line's actually going right through.
I'm going to stop you, Jason. Right, you've got a question on LXRA, so please. Okay, you can give it some context, but it's about LXRA.
Okay, well, I think it's just important to put that context in there, because the council is picking and choosing what it decides to fight for on behalf of the residents. But all over Melbourne, the residents of level crossing removals, they're much more satisfied with rail under road than road over rail, like's being proposed as an option by the LXRA, and which is probably 99% certain is going to happen. So I'd like to know why the council isn't being more proactive in seeking to influence the LXRA decision, as Moonee Valley was once they became aware of an outcome that they were not going to be happy with. It seems to me that the council is being very benign and subservient to whatever the LXRA wants to give us. And I don't think you're representing the local residents very well by having that attitude and just going along with whatever they want and looking at the side issues like the bike path or tram stops, which again are nothing to do with the LXRA and the level crossing removals. The LXRA have been very determined to try and give a partisan view as to what the actual outcomes are required around the level crossing removal, quoting that they have to move a sewage pipe that's 40 metres under the ground to dig a trench that's 8 metres deep is just complete fabrication. And I think as a council, the residents would really love to see you standing up for the local residents a lot more and with a lot more strength, so we actually get a fantastic outcome for everyone. And the best outcome, as shown across Melbourne, is rail under the road. What can council do from this point on to make sure that there's a loud voice being held within the chambers of government to ensure we get the right outcome?
Okay, thank you for your question. All right, anyone councillor like to answer the question? Councillor Tapados.
Very briefly. I do think it's great that you are all here expressing your views, and I do believe that it is our role to advocate quite strongly on projects that the state government does that have an impact in our city. However, I would note that at the moment, it's very early on in this stage. We don't have a preferred solution, a preferred option, or whether it's going to be elevated or a trench model. And I'm certain that more consultation will take place when more details are available. I'm dead certain of that, and if that is not the case officially, I'm sure that you'll be back here and council will formulate a view to the state government about that consultation process going forward. But I will caution as well that it's a very complex issue and a very important project that is city shaping, and there are many views out there. And there are many community benefits that we are seeking and our community is seeking through this process. And there are substantial benefits to both options that are being provided. So at the moment, it is important as a council that we sit back, gather the information, work with LXRA, arm ourselves with all information possible before we determine how and what method we should use to advocate. And for that reason, we are a little bit sitting back and waiting for that information to come forward.
So, all right, Councillor,
just very quickly. Look, I mean, these residents effectively voted for us to represent them. And I feel that what we've done with Melville Road, where councillors were actively campaigning with the residents to ensure that we got a win-win there, wasn't really our responsibility, but look what we did there. I believe that we do have a role to play in this. In 63 years, this is probably the biggest infrastructure capital that this government's spending on in the city of Moreland, and we're standing back waiting for them to host two meetings that none of us were invited to. That they had two meetings, and at those meetings they're alluding to Skyrail. I'm not hearing anything about going underground at all. I'm not hearing rail under road. I'm hearing Skyrail. And if you look at the stuff that's out there, when you Google it, it is actually looking like it's going to go that way. So I believe that we as councillors can have an opinion on it. We can go public on it. We can express our support for the residents to say we're not going to let this just go through. And it's about how we can lobby the current member here and the minister to say, hey, look, you know, we're not going to allow you to do this and destroy the livelihood and the privacy of so many residents that will be adjacent to this so-called Skyrail. We put up a statue and we argued for 6 months over a $2,000 statue. This is the biggest infrastructure spend that the state government's making, and we're having two meetings over it. I appreciate what Councillor Tapanos and also Councillor Riley are saying, but I really do think we've got to have more of an active role in this and let them know that we're not happy about it, and I support the residents, and I always will.
Thank you, Councillor Yildiz. Right, so we'll move on to Frank. Now, Frank has a question on on LXRA, and even though that's the fourth one, it does have quite a different bent regarding heritage buildings, so I accept the fourth question.
Thanks for the opportunity to ask the question. So my question is, given that the Moreland planning scheme states it is the council's policy to ensure that the new buildings or works do not adversely affect views and vistas toward, from and within heritage landscapes, do not present a physical threat to any tree with identified heritage value, and are subservient to and maintain the prominence of the significant elements of the heritage landscape, and that the Moreland planning scheme directs councillors to consider, when approving new works, whether the location, bulk, form or appearance of the proposed building will adversely affect the significance of the heritage place, and whether the location, bulk, form and appearance of the proposed building is in keeping with the character of the appearance of adjacent buildings and heritage of the place. What assurance can council provide to Moreland residents that it will protect heritage assets in accordance with local planning policies, given the proposed exemption from the planning scheme requirements of the heritage buildings and vegetation included in section 4.1 of the incorporated document, or the planning amendment C178?
Sorry. Good. Thank you very much, Frank, for that specific question. I will go to the Director for that because it's quite a specific planning question, that one. Acting Director.
Through the Mayor, Frank, thank you so much for your question. What I can advise is that planning scheme amendment process is one that is led by the LXRA, and everyone's had an opportunity to make a submission through that process, and there's an opportunity also to be heard. So you can give further feedback through the process to the LXRA on that amendment. Council is very aware and of a number of heritage assets on the line, whether it's signal boxes, the station buildings themselves, and we've actually put that through as important feedback as part of that planning scheme amendment process, that we like to see those heritage assets protected.
Thanks for your answer. I don't think it answers the question that I asked, though. The heritage
through the Chair, please. Through the Mayor. Through the Mayor. Okay.
The heritage assets that you've referred to are under Heritage Victoria, the Heritage Victoria Register. I'm referring to the Moreland Planning Scheme Heritage Overlay and the impact that these potential amendments will have on the heritage areas listing.
I'll take that because it is a clarification.
So whether it's in the Moreland Heritage Overlay or Victorian Heritage Register, those assets will need to be taken into account as part of the process for the planning scheme amendment process.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Thank you, Frank. All right, we're going to move on to the next questioner. And we've got Anna Den Hartog.
Thank you, Council, for this opportunity to question. My question, I hope the Council supports the motion for the report into the safety of the laneway running behind Sydney Road between Moreland Road and Blair Street, as we and other residents living on the laneway do not feel safe when we and our children use the laneway as pedestrians. I'd like to ask whether this report will take into consideration the following. The Pedestrian Strategy, which highlights pedestrian safety as a guiding principle, that in particular for Unit 1, 185 Moreland Road and the apartments at 6 Sydney Road, any person stepping into the laneway does so from a position which is obscured from the view of the drivers travelling north along the laneway from Moreland Road. And finally, the possibility of liaison with Vic Roads concerning the safety of a right-hand turn for Moreland Road into the laneway, which may be addressed through making the laneway a one-way entry only permitted from Blair Street.
Thank you very much for your question. As you allude to, it is on the notice of motion tonight, so it is on the agenda tonight. Does any councillor like to give an answer at this point, a response, remembering that we're not going to predetermine the decision tonight, but you can give it.
Thanks for the question. I think it is very good that you've raised this issue with Council, because the issues with this laneway are very similar to the issues of a number of other laneways, because nowadays a lot of laneways that might not have been used very much in the past are used as the entry and exits for big apartment buildings, and so there are a lot of traffic and safety issues, I believe, around laneways now that might not have existed in the past. So anyway, I can't preempt the discussion about the motion that's coming up later on, but I think it is very good that you've raised this issue.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for the question. Nick Dolby.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk. It's about unmade laneways. There's a thing coming up on charging for the construction of unmade laneways. I suppose I'm coming at it from a different angle. You've already heard me speak and submit to the council over the years that I value laneways in our urban fabric. They provide permeability. Even when they are dead ends, they provide permeability to those houses that lead onto them. They're micro parks. They present somewhere where people can play and so on. But in particular, I have been alerted to the value of unmade laneways by the report Chain of Ponds on Moonee Ponds Creek that talked about the desirability of permeable surfaces in our suburb, in our water catchments. Unmade laneways are not merely representing an asset from a pedestrian perspective, from a child play perspective, from a green space perspective, but from a water recharging perspective. And so I'm asking councillors, my question is do you see unmade laneways as a liability, which most of the policy around them is framed, or do you see them as an asset, which is what I'm trying to present? I'd also like to touch briefly upon two other issues in the agenda tonight, Cumberland Road and Pedestrian Strategy of level crossings outside of
Go for it now and then...
good. That's the thing. So there's the question good. And then there's the good. Okay, so that's my question.
Okay. Unmade laneways, asset or liability, I suppose we're looking at. Do we have a councillor that would like to answer that? Now, the director, I think it's probably Grant.
Through the Mayor, thanks for the question, Nick. As you outlined, laneways form many purposes. The report tonight is considering, an element of that, which is the contribution that residents might make to upgrading unmade laneways. But as you're aware, there are many other policies across council that consider laneways. For example, probably 2 years ago, there's a lot of work done around bluestone laneways and permeability of the surfaces, etc. So council is aware of the value that laneways in many forms, whether they be for permeability of pedestrian linkages, etc., or for stormwater. But the report tonight considering about contributions to upgrading laneways that access properties.
Thank you very much, Director. Now, councillors, that concludes the questions that are on the agenda, but we do have time within the 30-minute period, and there is a question here that's not on the agenda tonight, but we're within the 30-minute period. Mary Saeed.
Hello. Well, in a sense, I shouldn't be talking about it here, but when I've been putting it forward to the person that I have been dealing with, and I don't get the answer, I'm going to bring it here in front of all of you. I have been asking for the specific of where it says on the legislation that the construction works are allowed to commence when the council have found inconsistency in the demolishing of the from the endorsed plans and they have requested to have amendments of the existing endorsed plans, and before the owner has submitted what the council is being asking of the owner, they were allowed to continue to start with the construction. I would like to know where it says on the legislation, because I asked, what I was given was 5 different legislation to look for and to find it. I asked for the person that was dealing with this specific question to at least highlight it for me. If it's there, it's there. Right. So there is nothing to worry about. But it wasn't given to me. Right. The other thing is, there was the reinforcement put in place for the wall that was demolished to be erected to its own original material. Now, it was given to be done within 28 days. Yeah, okay. So what I would like to ask is, if that wall is not done according to what the council is asking, what will happen then?
Okay, thank you. I think there's pretty specific questions, so I'll go to the Director on those two.
Hi, Mary. Thank you for your question. The first part is in relation to the legislation, so that is the Planning and Environment Act. So when plans are endorsed, they can't be altered unless people get written permission from council in this case. So where something has been done outside of the endorsed plans, then what happens, which is the second part of the question, is we send our enforcement team out. And in this case, I understand that they have been out there this week and that the wall is being reinstated. And that's expected to take a number of weeks in terms of the cladding going on. But we are aware of the problem and it is being fixed.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Director. Yep. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. John, I've misplaced your question, but I do accept that there was one on the table and it is on the agenda tonight, so please.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I actually had 2 questions, but my interest actually was in several items, so I've restricted it to just 2.
Thank you, John.
So my first question relates to the climate emergency motion that will be moved later on tonight. I've been to the last 3 UN climate change conferences, so I've been very active on this issue over several years. It's a very important motion. I've just spent the last 2 days over at Northcote Town Hall at the Darebin Climate Emergency Conference. What I also wish to acknowledge that Council's work in terms of the Zero Carbon Moreland 2020 refresh and the 2040 framework that's also coming up at this meeting, and the Melbourne Airport expansion submission, which I emailed you all in regards to. And I also wish to note there was a major speech by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, on the need to rapidly ramp up climate, that it is an existential risk. So my specific question is, I think we need to enhance the climate emergency motion by adding a fourth point, that all council officer reports add a sustainability climate lens. I know that Hume Council already does this, and I suggest it would be an improvement. I've already raised this with some of the councillors going back to March, and this has been supported by Climate Action Moreland, whom I'm a member of.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. And just before I ask for any responses, I do acknowledge your tireless work in this area over many years. Anyone like to respond, or perhaps it may be responded to in the time that the report comes forward? But the suggestion is there. But if anyone wants to comment, yes, you do.
It might be good to get officers just on the question in particular. I think the debate's probably going to sort itself out. But
okay. Yeah, would you like to?
Through the Mayor, thank you for the question. I'm just thinking through some of the practicality. So currently we have an environmental implications section in the template. The issue is really getting sort of sufficient depth in those sorts of sections. Whenever you introduce a template section, it's not enough to introduce a template, it's about actually having the sufficient technical depth to be able to respond to what that really means. So currently we do have that actually in our template. I think it would be really reasonable to take on board your suggestion as to how to strengthen that. I don't think the template needs to change, it's actually more, well, how do we strengthen what's in there? Because, you know, if you're an officer whose main job is, you know, let's say you're in, I don't know, a health area, you're not going to have necessarily the same technical expertise as somebody who may be in the environmental area to write that section of your report. So there's a little bit more thinking that probably has to do to that point before we could go ahead. But I'm very happy to take that on board.
Thank you very much, John.
My second question relates to the notice of motion in regards to the Cities with Nature, and I fully support joining this new organisation, coordinating various council bodies. And I wish to note that we have 36 threatened species that inhabit or visit Moreland already. I did ask a question a couple of months ago of Mark Riley, do we have a biodiversity officer on as a position with council? And I never got a firm response.
Okay, we'll answer that for you in a moment.
And I'd also like to note that in the Open Space Strategy 2012 to 2022, there is actually an action point to prepare and implement a biodiversity strategy to identify priority measures for the protection, restoration and enhancement of native plant and animal communities. To be done by the Open Space Design and Development. Has this been done? Is there such a strategy? Is it publicly available, or can it be supplied to me?
Thank you very much, John. Well, the first part of the question I'll get the CEO to answer.
Yep. Through the Mayor. So just for your information, we have been processing that question about biodiversity officers, so it wasn't that Mark didn't pass that on. So to give you the further explanation, we've got people in different areas, particularly in our open space area, that have this expertise in regards to flora. I think the missing, or the bit that we've been discussing and debating, and I think you also raised it in regards to kangaroo mob and a number of other things, is how from a fauna perspective, how that function is covered. Often there's a temptation to create a new officer position to do these, you know, specific things. I think my advice is we do actually have that expertise in the open space area. The part that, and this is where the delay is, you know, we don't often have issues such as kangaroo mobs or those types of things to deal with. And so we've got to think through, well, how do we handle that? So that's separate to what we currently already have. In relation to the biodiversity strategy, I don't think, so we'll probably need to just get back to you separately. The Director's shaking his head saying we're not ready with it. But what we will do is write to you and give you some further information on that.
wouldn't. But
Thank you.
Can I just add another?
Yes, you can.
I'll just to further add, and I spoke to you, John, about this today at the conference, that as my understanding is, and the CEO may actually clarify this, that we are looking at all of our policies. We have an enormous number of policies and strategies, if anyone's taken the time. It's quite a long list to read. And I believe we are doing some work on trying to, if I could use the word rationalise, but actually make it a bit easier for officers, the community and councillors and everybody to actually access those policies and where they intersect. And I believe we are doing quite a bit of work at that level, so that we're looking at the matrix of, so we're covering everything, flora, fauna and all of the things we need to do, but also going down the page to make sure that we're actually getting the intersections happening. So they're not there, and I think Narina's already commented on that, but I believe that's some work that we're already doing as well, which is germane to what you're raising, and making sure that we are considering all the things that local council needs to consider.
Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. And councillors, that takes us to the end of the 30 minutes and the end of the questions that we had on that. So we move on now to council reports. And we move to the first report to consider this evening, which is DED 5418, Adoption of Zero Carbon Evolution Refresh from 2020 to 2040 Framework. And Councillor Martin, would you like to move that?
Yes, please.
Councillor Martin is moving the officer recommendation. Councillor Martin?
I'd like to move a slightly amended version.
So tell us that and then we'll look.
So the amendment is to just adjust the 2020 goal in the Zuki refresh from the current goal, food, green waste, curbside collection service available to 70% of households in Moreland on page 20, to be adjusted to aim for 100% uptake of the food and green waste curbside collection for households that have access to the service.
Right, okay, that's moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Yildiz. Now, would you like to speak to it, Councillor Martin?
Yes, I would. Thank you. So this has been one of the flagship pieces of work that we as a council have worked on. And I know this is probably one of the most impressive strategies and one of the actual strategies that actually encouraged me to run for this council back probably about 3 years ago now. I would like to start by thanking the executive staff, the Environment Unit and the Moreland Energy Foundation for all of their work to get the document from where it was to where we are now, because without them and without the commitment of these people working on this policy, we wouldn't be where we are. 2 years ago, when we first got elected to council, our Zuki strategy was actually under a serious risk of missing all of the targets that we'd set because it was critically underfunded, especially in some of the areas that council was driving. What this refresh does is it goes through the original Zuki strategy and it aligns it with tangible actions for council and Moreland Energy Foundation to roll out across the municipality. And what it really does is it highlights the areas in which we can take action, in which residents can take action. And it really, while still keeping our 5 target areas of generating local renewable energy, using less energy, low emissions transport, minimising the urban heat island effect, and activating our community to reduce emissions, while still having those categories, what it does is it locks in a pathway for us to actually reach the 22% reduction by 2020. Now, touching on our 2040 framework, this truly is an Australian leading piece of work. What we're doing is we're attempting to break down the silos across council, and for anyone that's dealt with a council before, you realise that there are silos. What we're doing is we're actually putting our 2040 strategy, we're putting the areas of energy transition, sustainable transport and waste and consumption together in a framework that actually sets the baseline for Moreland to really get to zero carbon emissions by 2040. And it truly is a really amazing piece of work. And I can't emphasise enough how much I really think that every resident should have a copy of this, should take a look at this, because this is demonstrating that Moreland as a council are taking this issue seriously. And it's something that we are, with this framework, really setting the foundations for the next 20 years to actually make a tangible impact on what we'll later discuss tonight is an actual emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Yildiz, would you like to speak to it? Are there any other councillors who'd like to speak either in favour or against? In favour, yep.
I'd like to speak in favour of this item.
Any against? No, you go. You can go forward, Councillor Riley.
Yes, I was just trying to work out where I was going to speak tonight on this issue because I've spent some of the last 2 days at the Climate Emergency Conference in Northcote today, and I want to acknowledge and thank Darebin City Council for running that conference. There's some really engaging and useful discussions and presentations. I just really want to bring it back down to one part of what Councillor Martin has mentioned, which is that the work that we are doing in our city right now and tomorrow is what I'm inviting and hoping that the citizens of Moreland are engaging on. And I know many of you are already doing this. There are many examples of it. John's an example of a Climate Action Moreland member and activist, and they've influenced and supported and helped council get moving on many of the policies around urban heat island effect, for example, for divesting our investments in finances, and there's a whole lot of examples that I can go into. But there are very practical things that people are doing at home, like composting and worm farming, because if you can get your food waste out of your bins, you're actually doing having enormous personal and family impact on what we can do to stop emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, particularly the really dangerous ones that come from food waste. They're even worse than some of the stuff that cars do. So I just wanted to really reiterate the fact that I'd like people to read and engage with this, to get involved with Moreland Energy Foundation and who are helping and partnering with council to do this work. There's a Brains Trust. There are many, many forums that you can get involved in, and I would really seriously hope that if you're not already doing that, you can do that, and that you will engage with us on some of our other strategies around getting to zero emissions and zero waste, because they are essential for us to get to that. We're also dealing tonight on fleet and our fleet management, our car management and the emissions around that, and John's already alluded to the airport. So this is coming up, every other report, climate impacts are there. I could talk about lots of disastrous emergency-related matters, and they are scary. In fact, if you go and have a look at David Spratt's presentation from that work, in fact, he wrote a book in 2008 when I was in the top end 10 years ago. That book is as relevant now as it was then. He was predicting then what was going to happen when we got to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees. Well, the experts are saying we could only go to 0.5 a degree above where we're at, and we're already going way beyond that. We're actually slated at the moment, if you just bear with me, I'll finish on this point, that if the Paris Agreement is played out at current practices and projections, we are headed for at least a 2 to 3 degree and beyond warming. And if you map out all of our international, the very last comment, all of our international COPs and conferences, you'd have to argue that they are failing. The international efforts are failing because every year we have one and the emissions continue to rise. So I could harp on about those facts and figures, but I want to just come back to the fact we are doing it as a council, and I'm inviting you to work with us because we can't do it without you. So
thank you, Councillor Ryan. Any other councillors like to speak to it? As it is a very important issue, I'm happy to take it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It certainly is a very large policy that brings together a whole range of different areas of council and many other different strategies as well, many of which have been mentioned already. I try not to cover ground that's already been repeated, but just to highlight that as part of this refresh, we are not downgrading our commitment to reaching 22% reduction, community reduction in carbon emissions by 2020, and our very much aspirational objective of reaching, I think it was 40% by 2040. So those targets are still there. I guess what this refresh is looking at, what is the best way to achieve that, and try to also develop a conversation in the community about what could residents do and what the business world can do and other levels of government to make sure that we bring our emissions as a municipality down. Now, it's important that I say that we are focusing on our community, not the council itself, which achieved its carbon neutral status a number of years ago and was one of the first to do so. I do know that the state government over the last couple of weeks has released a new policy to provide a loan scheme for solar panels, and that's in addition to the rebate that's already provided. I know that that was one of the big objectives of this policy into the future. So it's great to see that another level of government has effectively picked it up and actually run with it and implementing it. So it is important that we do review and refresh this policy and see where we can get the best value for our money. And I fully support its recommendations and like to thank the officers and everyone who's been involved, and MEFL, particularly MEFL, who have been involved in the refresh.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Any other speakers on this topic? Yes, Councillor Bolton.
Maybe just a couple of very brief points. I don't want to repeat what's been said, but I think probably what makes it graphic is the summer across the Northern Hemisphere that we've just seen, which I'm rather scared about this coming summer, where we've had bushfires in the Arctic and reindeers trying to take shelter in tunnels for cars, because very unnatural behaviour for reindeers because of the lack of cool weather and lack of access to snow and so forth. So, I mean, I think we probably are heading into a very dangerous summer ourselves in Australia. So I certainly agree that we need to be doing everything we can as a council and as a community to bring down carbon emissions. I also would like to just make note of one point within the report where it makes mention of the fact that it's not enough just to shift the car fleet from petrol-driven to electricity-driven, because that, in reality, all that does is create a higher demand for electricity. And I think, therefore, the council does need to increase its advocacy around more public transport, because I think that is, more public transport, so that more people have a choice to be able to use public transport to get to work wherever they need to go, is the best way of, or one of the best ways of trying to reduce not only traffic congestion, but it does help reduce carbon emissions.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Any other speakers? Being no further speakers, I'm going to put this to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously.
Can I please put a motion to alter the order of business?
Yes.
Thank you. Just the motion would be that the item listed at Notice of Motion 3618, the traffic calming on the laneway adjacent to 185 Moreland Road, be considered now, if that's okay.
You don't have to put the motion, we'll just do that.
Can I propose the level crossing removal be brought forward?
Okay. All right, so we'll move on then to Notice of Motion 3618, Traffic Calming Review on laneway adjacent to 185 Moreland Road, Cobert, and you'd like to move the officer recommendation?
Yep.
Oh, sorry, move Councillor Farley's Notice of Motion.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd just like to put this motion on behalf of Councillor O'Farnley that states that Council undertakes a review of the pedestrian safety issues in the laneway adjacent to 185 Moreland Road, Coburg, that this review should include investigating traffic calming measures that address concerns raised by residents who access their homes off the laneway, and point 2, receives a report on the outcome of the review of the pedestrian safety issues in the laneway adjacent to 185 Moreland Road, Coburg, and any future actions required.
Right, that's moved by Councillor Bood and seconded by Councillor Bolton. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Bood?
I don't think I need to.
No. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Bolton?
I think it's pretty obvious from what we said earlier the evening.
Thank you. Any speakers? No, there being none, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. All right, we'll move on to Notice of Motion 4318, Level Crossings, and that's a Notice of Motion from Councillor Bolton.
Okay, so my motion is that Council contacts the Level Crossing Removal Authority to A, request specific information about the extent of the public notification for each phase of the consultation, including which properties along the railway line were letterboxed for which phase and which stakeholder groups were consulted. B, express concern about the inadequacy of the public consultation, including that it appears that residents living beside the railway line were not letterboxed about the community drop-in information sessions before they occurred. C, request that the Level Crossing Removal Authority conducts letterboxing of residents living beside the railway line for the September consultation meetings, being referred to by them as touchpoint meetings, to provide residents with feedback about what was raised during the initial consultation, and letterboxing of residents beside the railway line for community consultation meetings to discuss the design proposals. Further, that the Level Crossing Removal Authority conducts some of these meetings as public meetings rather than be limited to drop-in meetings. And if I have a seconder, I'll explain my reasons.
Right, so that's moved by Councillor Bolton. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Yildiz. You may speak to it, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you. Well, I strongly believe that the role of council is both to carry out measures in the interests of the community, but also to advocate on behalf of the community to other levels of government and, you know, in the community's interest. And the council has advocated to other levels of government on all sorts of different issues, as one of the residents earlier pointed out, around the East-West link, and I was involved in that as well. I believe council does have an obligation to advocate on behalf of the community around the level crossing removals. Now, certainly public consultation around level crossing removals, it is definitely being run by the LXRA, the Level Crossing Removal Authority. It's a state government project, it's not a council project. But when the consultation is so grossly inadequate, council has a responsibility to argue in support of the residents for better consultation. I haven't heard of a consultation where residents get letterboxed after the community information meetings rather than before those meetings. I've got no idea how their consultation was done in other areas, but I was quite shocked to hear that. So it means that the only people who knew about those meetings were people who happened to catch the train at the station on the days that the leafleting was done, or saw the ad in the Moreland Leader, or someone they knew had heard about it and passed on the information. So I think that is grossly inadequate. Now, I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other on which is the best solution. I feel that the community doesn't have enough information, and I don't have enough information to say over or under is the best way forward. But certainly there needs to be a forum for residents to be able to ask whatever questions they need to ask. And I certainly don't have blind trust in the LXRA. We saw the situation in Camp Road where the level crossing was removed. Unfortunately, no station was put in so people could get on a train. But they also, as part of that process, they blocked off the bike path. Then I understand, I don't know all of the details, but at the Buckley Street level crossing removal, there have been problems for pedestrians and cyclists with the solution that's been put forward by LXRA there. So I don't have blind faith in LXRA, and I think council should back residents in calling for better and more consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Yildiz.
Thanks. Can I just make it clear that I'm definitely in favour of level crossing removal? I just want to make that clear. This is not about that for me. Just want to mention the feedback sought was between the 13th of August and 7th of September. That's 25 days that they really had this open to the public to make comment. I haven't seen anyone around the Cobert train station or even Moreland station surveying anyone. The most important people are probably residents, but also the people that actually frequent and use that line. So the state government's going to make this massive investment, which is fantastic, and a decision for the future of our current generation. And we are going to do it with 2 meetings. Fantastic. We've suffered level crossing pain for far too long, not just here but also in Glenroy, and this is probably one of the cheapest solutions, and that's what they're hoping to adopt. The residents have been unfairly treated, I believe, with respect to the consultation that's taken place, and I agree with Councillor Bolton in what her summation just then. So I believe that the local community, in particular the residents, the public transport users, the cyclists, pedestrians and people with disabilities, all need a better opportunity to express and have questions. And I think they need to open this feedback up again to really understand and try and empathise what the residents are going through. I spoke to a gentleman this afternoon who has a number of properties. In fact, he's got 3 properties and 1 on Reynard Street. And he was alluding to the fact that if this was going to go ahead, he'd probably sell and leave the area. But my disappointment is how many others will probably do the same. So I'm definitely in support of this, and I hope as a council we can make it quite clear that we don't believe that the consultation process has been handled competently.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Do you have any speakers against the motion? Councillor
So I raised to speak not against the full motion, but to actually question elements of the motion. I live right near Moreland train station. Councillor Bolton has been to my street a couple of times for community meetings that I wasn't aware of. I was actually letterboxed. I have a friend who lives on Railway Parade, was letterboxed. I got my letter probably almost 2 weeks before the consultation. So I admit that maybe I'm an anomaly, and my friend is also an anomaly. My friend's also an anomaly. But a non-normal, yeah, okay. But yeah, I do find it strange that both myself and one of my friends also got letterboxed. I did run into them twice at Moreland train station flyering as well. So I know that that's 3 points of contact that I had, and I don't catch the train every day. I do often ride most of the time. So I find it strange that they haven't given enough consultation, but our experience that we all saw with PTV in the past does indicate that they potentially don't do consultation well, and it's one of the state government's great legacies that they don't particularly do consultation very well. So I would like to propose that we actually seek further information before we make some demands, because I don't know the extent to which notification was given, and if you had to ask me to vote for the entire motion, I'd probably vote against it because of my experience, but I would tend to actually only support probably A, and then once we actually are aware of the extent of consultation, then I'd be happy to ask them for more. I'd probably also be happy to suggest that they run further consultations as well, but I'm not terribly comfortable supporting expressing my concerns, given that I myself had 3 points of contact with them. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, Councillor Boo.
First of all, I just wanted to ask a question about the 11th of April council meeting of the CEO through the chair, if that's okay. So I'm just wondering, it says here that we would seek a meeting with the State Minister for Public Transport and Major Projects to express council's support for the Upfield Line level crossing removal project, present the advocacy case, which I expect was for an all-of-line solution, and seek confirmation about timing, blah, blah, blah. I just wondered if that happened.
So through the Mayor, we requested meetings with the Minister. What we did get was the opportunity to put all of our material through the LXRA. We were told that that material had gotten to the Minister and there was not a requirement for a meeting, so we have not been able to get into the meeting with the Minister, but we have been reassured that that information's been provided.
And we have had meetings with the Level Crossing Removal Authority.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to confirm that we did have spent a significant amount of money costing plans for the project as council on behalf of the residents with regard to what it all looked like, just with an idea about getting a broader information after a couple of presentations were held about a specific outcome. I'm a bit concerned about, because I met with Jason it feels like a year ago. I don't know. Time doesn't have a realistic.
It was that long ago.
Yeah, okay. And I was aware at the time that he has a specific outcome in mind, and I believe that is the intention of the group. So I'm a little bit concerned about comparisons between council's position, which we haven't taken a position whether we think up or down is better. What we're looking for is all of it dealt with in one fell swoop. And I suspect that if we're here advocating for down, then we need to be quite clear about that to the people who possibly think we're advocating for up, which I'm pretty sure most of us, well, some of us have, most of us have not taken a position either way. So I'm wondering if it's possible if we break this up into 3 points, because I have no problem about requesting specific information. But I think at this stage we definitely have engaged in much of the work around this decision, which is not ours to make. And we have done that without taking a strong position, which was the case with the tunnel, East-West Link. That it was a completely different conversation, and it was taking a position then arguing to that position rather than what we're talking about here, in my opinion.
Okay, so you're suggesting that you'd like the motion to be separated?
Yeah.
Is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
I'd prefer not, but it doesn't really worry me that much either way. But I think it's chicken to do it.
That it's what?
I think it's anyway. I just think it's okay to separate it. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, is it acceptable to break it up?
Yeah, that's
it
okay.
Is. Okay, is it acceptable the seconder? Okay. All right, well, we might do that. We'll continue the debate at the moment, and then when we come to vote, we'll vote separately. Councillor Tapanos.
Debated as a whole. Mr Mayor, councillors, I rise to speak against all points that have been proposed. And the reason why I do so is because I do think it's superfluous, unnecessary, and probably even counterproductive. There is going to be lots and lots and lots of opportunities for consultation when more detailed plans are available. I think we're all saying that. We expect that to happen. And if we found out tomorrow that they were building construction and hadn't consulted, then we will be demanding that that does occur. So I do sympathise with some of those elements of the last stop point. But I think at this early stage, whilst they're just beginning a conversation, it is probably not wise to go down the path to be demanding information and be classifying their consultation as inadequate and insufficient. I think the Alex RA probably have one of the largest communications budgets of all authorities in the state government. That might be a bit different now with Melbourne Metro and some of the others, but they have a lot of people working there. I get a lot of information. I have signed up for their emails. I like the Alex RA on Facebook. I have seen a number of pieces of information out there in the community. But I will say this, that the reason why I think it is unwise to move this now is because what you are seeking, that consultation that you are seeking, will happen when there is more information to be presenting. And at that stage, when we have that information, we can actually undertake, we can have a position on it as a council, and I hope that we will at that point be able to say, yes, we agree with elevated rail or the trench model. But until such time that the LRXA are just saying, look, we're doing this line, tell us what you think, there is probably no need to be saying it wasn't insufficient, it was insufficient, you didn't send this, you didn't do that, when it's only the beginning of their consultation process. So I would say, let's vote this down, let's keep a dialogue open, let's work with them, and by all means, let's tell them this is a community that wants to be consulted. And make sure that they put in place a mechanism to do that into the future. But I think this motion is just not required.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other councillors like to speak?
I'd just like to call a point of order. I really find it offensive to be called for my actions to be referred to as being chicken in a public meeting.
I'll withdraw.
Find that highly offensive.
I'm sorry, I missed that. I didn't realise. Okay.
It's not something I
right,
do.
it's been withdrawn. Thank you, Councillor, to withdraw. Okay. Thank you. All right. Would you like to close the debate, Councillor?
I must admit, I'm sort of quite shocked that something which is a very simple motion, it's not a radical motion at all, simply calling on a government authority that's conducting consultation very badly to have better consultation. I just don't think we should be giving the LXRA a blank cheque and just assuming that, you know, they'll have fantastic consultation when it comes to the specific design. They have gone out into the community for some level of conversation, which Councillor Tapanos describes as a conversation. I'm not sure what the difference is between a conversation and a consultation. So, you know, I'm assuming the two things are meant to be the same. I'm aware that an LXRA rep told some of the residents that they didn't do letterboxing or in some areas. So, I mean, it is good that one of the councillors was letterboxed and his friend was letterboxed, but there is information which indicates that that isn't the experience in all places. So, you know, I'm not saying everything they've done has been wrong, but I feel on the basis of the contact I've had with residents that that the consultation hasn't been sufficient so far, and therefore I think we do need to try and insist that the rest of the consultation is properly notified of all of the people living along the railway line. And that has definitely not happened for quite a lot of residents who live along the railway line. So I think it would be a total shame and real outrage if councillors vote this down, which is just a simple request for better consultation.
Okay, as the mover, that closes the debate. I'm sorry, because she was Councillor Bolton was the mover, so therefore had the right to close. So we're going to vote on these separately, and we're going to start with number A. So, councillors, you're aware what you're voting on here. Only point A. I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour of point A? Against? Declare point A carried. We move now to point B. Right. Everyone clear? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that lost. Point C. All those in favour? Against? Declare that lost. Thank you, councillors. Well, I'm going to move back now to the agenda as printed. So we move to the DSD 2118 Art Acquisition and Collection Development Policy Adoption. Councillor Riley, would you like to move the officer recommendation?
Yes, I would, thank you.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Abood.
I just would like to move this motion as written and to thank the Moreland Arts Board and all those involved in developing this art acquisition and collection development policy. It's to look after a very precious resource that the city's developed over many years ostensibly under the name of Noel Coonahan and the gallery that we have in Sydney Road, but also in terms of how we manage works that may no longer need to be kept because of their deterioration and so on. So it's just a very prudent management policy for collecting and acquiring and deciding about which artworks we do collect and which ones we're not likely to collect. And some of those issues will be coming to this committee. We get to decide that throughout the year, and this will guide us as we do that. So it gives us the criteria in the outline. So I want to commend the officers and the Moreland Arts Board for this work.
Councillor Boo, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, I feel like this is such an important motion, and I'm really excited about the quality of artists that we have in the city, so I'm quite delighted to second accepting this report. And I had the pleasure of being gifted by my mother a beautiful painting by an artist called Simon Grennan that was recently exhibited at the Coonahan Gallery, and I had the pleasure of opening that exhibition, and it's probably lucky for my mum that I have only ever opened one exhibition at that gallery, or she might be hard pressed to keep up with the paintings that I think I need to own. So I think it's fantastic that this city has such a focus and the resources to be able to put this kind of investment into arts in the city, and I look forward to being able to see it continue to happen.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any speakers against the motion? If there's no speakers against, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Move to EMOD 418, Environmental Management Systems Scope. Councillor Martin, sorry. That's just... Councillor Martin.
Thank you. First, I'd like to start by saying anomaly. Just to get that on the record that I can actually say that word. I'd like to move a slight amendment to the officer recommendation, and that is that we go for option 3 as opposed to option 4, which is listed in the report. If I have a seconder, I'll happily talk to it.
Yep, Councillor Riley.
Thank you. So the decision that to move option 3 is just because we are going for the unaccredited version of the EMS system. I still think it would be good for us to seek advice from a professional in this area, just to make sure that we are on track, especially when we're looking at our aspects and impacts and our environmental policy and things of the like. So I do think that that's important. I just want to touch on this item. Being one of the councillors who was lucky enough to attend the Australian Institute of Company Directors course, and then subsequently gaining the accreditation from the course, I know that one of the key responsibilities that we have in our role of governance is to mitigate and manage risk. It's something that we need to do, and people who are on boards all across the country recognise that managing risk is a core responsibility of what they need to do. And as councillors, we can't simply just outsource this risk to the Risk and Audit Committee. We actually need to put mechanisms in place to say with confidence we are managing these risks. Now, we have spoken already tonight a little bit about environmental risk and climate change mitigation risks. And for a council or a local government area that is putting so much money into our strategies like our Zuki, for us not to be having an environmental management system as well, it does seem a bit odd. So I'm also going to read for those who may be watching that might actually not know what I'm talking about. This is taken directly out of the report. And so an EMS is a structured, systematic and standardised framework to identify potential impacts to the environment brought about by an organisation's operations, with a process to ensure that appropriate treatment and mitigation plans are implemented. So what we do through this process is we identify every area that council has an environmental impact, and then strategies to mitigate against those environmental aspects. And so what we're doing here is really setting the foundation for a broader risk management framework across council, and we already have enterprise risk management systems in place, but what we're doing here is we're actually adding that additional lens of environmental risk. And I had a look at the register before across Australia, so there's over 4,000 organisations in Australia that are accredited to the 14,001 standard. We're not seeking that accreditation here. We're just seeking to do an in-house system. And there's also 19 councils across the country that are accredited to this standard, of which we're not seeking tonight. So I really do encourage and implore my fellow councillors to support this policy as it is simply good governance.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Riley?
Just briefly, this is a really important part of it's like an insurance policy, if you like, but it's actually down on a day-to-day basis in terms of what all of our units and divisions within the council are undertaking. So we're talking about outside in the open air, inside our buildings, underneath the buildings, on top of them, and in terms of where the public interact and interface with each other and where we have some control over that. So it goes from footpaths to roads to wiring, chemicals and all sorts of things. So I just wanted to kind of concretise it a bit and realise that this is, even though it may sound a bit sort of, highfalutin about some sort of environmental management system, it's actually quite a very practical thing around occupational health and safety, in other words. And it's a really important part of our insurance policy, because if we do this work and we minimise the risks, then we're going to have less payouts and less problems where people are actually calling on us to recompense them for damage that might have occurred for something that we have been responsible for. So it's a very important part of our work. And even though there's substantial money involved, I think it's a very important investment to do that. And as board members, that's what board members need to do, and that's what councillors need to do. So thank you. Thanks to the officers for this work.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Any speakers against? Yes?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I'm just wondering, look, it is the role of the Audit and Risk Committee to be determining the risk for the whole organisation, not just one aspect, which is the environmental risk, which this management system is looking to do. So I do think that it would be most appropriate for this motion to be taken off the table and referred to the Audit and Risk Committee to see whether it is a system that they would be willing to adopt, recommend and implement and integrate with the rest of our audit systems within the council. We certainly wouldn't want to be doing something that is outside of the existing processes and does not comply with the existing processes. When you have a look at the money involved, I think it is substantial. I think it is significant money because of this. We as a council are very, very good at environmental risk management. And in fact, I believe we've had an independent organisation conduct an audit of our key council processes in line with this management system. And some of the findings that they found that we had already a very strong commitment to positive environmental outcomes, along with good processes to ensure environmental impacts are considered and managed in council's planning and operations. So in a way, we are doing this work already. In a way, it is really not needed, and that's what our independent auditors told us. So let's actually talk about what we are getting for our money. We're getting a part-time staff member, and we're getting a consultant. Now, if we're already coming up as we are very good in managing risk around environmental sustainability, and yet we also have a previous resolution, the Zuki refresh, which we adopted today, where we've heard that a lot of the recommendations in that strategy are not funded. I think it is money better spent to actually not be employing more staff and consultants, but to actually be making real change when it comes to climate change and sustainability. So if you think of $260,000, that could buy more solar panels for our sporting clubs. That could subsidise solar panels for people in need or people on low incomes in our community. It could expand the operations of series. I would know they would love to have that extra money. To MEFL, to other environmental organisations in our city. It could do a lot in regards to sustainable water management, implementing the new regulations around protecting solar panels. There are so many actions in Zuki that could use $260,000. Why get a consultant and a staff member to tell us what we already know, that we're doing a good job? Councillors, vote this down.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers in favour? Okay, I'll let you close in a moment. Any other speakers like to speak against? All right, as the mover of the motion, Councillor Martin, would you like to close it?
Yeah, and I'll be brief. Councillors, we can have as many audits as we want, but if we do not have a standard, an internationally peer-reviewed standard, that over 300,000 organisations across the world subscribe to, how do we know what good is? We don't. We do not know what good is. We can have as many audit reports telling us that we are good at everything, but unless we have a peer-reviewed, international standard, there is no way that we can actually, hand on heart, say that we are actually up to scratch. And so, you know, we can sit here all day and talk about whether or not we could take this to the Audit and Risk Committee. And if we were to ask the Audit and Risk Committee, do you think Council should bring its processes up to speed with international accreditations? I have a pretty clear understanding and a pretty clear idea of what they will tell us.
Well, why don't we do that then?
No, Councillor.
So I really encourage my fellow councillors to actually work with the officers that are already doing brilliant work and that are already shaping our strategies and our internal enterprise risk systems in this direction, but to actually say what we're going to do is we are going to be internationally the best at what we do, because unless we have this benchmark in place, we actually don't know where we stand. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. As the mover that closes the debate, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
We have that noted.
You want a division? You want a division?
I'm just happy to vote against.
Okay, so all in favour except for Councillor Tapanos? Do we need to go through it? No. Okay. All right, just before we move on to the next item, I noticed that we have a former councillor in the public gallery, former councillor Daniel De Laurentiis. Good to have you here, Daniel, and thank you for joining us. All right, the next report to consider this evening is DCI 3218, Framework for Council Contribution towards the Construction of Unmade Laneways. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Abood. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Tapanos. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Abood? No. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Tapanos?
Yes, briefly. I guess this is a really big step forward because we are developing a framework to be able to seek contributions from abutting residents when we do get requests to make unmade laneways. So, yes, we do value our laneways in our city. Some should be made and some others should remain as they are. We need to have a robust process where we can determine how we invest our money into the future and which ones are getting sufficient traffic, both vehicle and pedestrian, to warrant consideration for them to be constructed. I know that residents do seek to construct as many of their abutting laneways as possible, because if they're not constructed, sometimes they attract dumped rubbish, there are weeds that grow, and they are untidy sites. So the problem for us is that there are so many of them across the city. How do we prioritise, and how do we make sure that we are also getting a contribution back from abutting residents? Because although there is community benefits to making these unmade laneways, there's also a personal benefit for those who live adjacent to them. So I think this policy strikes the right balance and certainly creates a framework for us to be able to undertake these works when there is significant support from residents to do so and contributions towards those projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Do we have any other speakers? Being no further speakers, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
The highest rated council in Melbourne. You were
Former councillor, please. Come on, you know the rules. You know the rules, Daniel. Okay, the next report we have to consider is DCI 3318, pedestrian. Please. Please. Right. DCI 3318, Pedestrian Strategy Review, pedestrian crossings near commercial developments. Sorry. You're moving the office recommendation or...
With an additional point.
Okay, could you go through that please, Councillor Bolton?
So the additional point is that where a new supermarket is developed in a residential building without a nearby pedestrian crossing, that a review of pedestrian safety is conducted after 2 years to determine if additional pedestrian safety measures are needed.
You're seconding? Yep. Okay, thank you, Councillor Abood, and you're happy to second with what Councillor Bolton moved? Yep, fine. Thank you. Please speak to it, Councillor Bolton.
Yes,
if you like.
I initiated the original notice of motion that called for this report, and I was disappointed that the recommendation didn't include any action points, and I'm aware that the pedestrian strategy is going to be reviewed in a year or two's time, but I felt that there are potentially some sites which are new sites which are dangerous for pedestrians, and really the issue that really got me thinking about this was the IGA on Nicholson Street, where it's sort of nearish to an intersection, but given, as our pedestrian strategy notes, that pedestrians is the slowest form of transport, so people take a shortcut, which means that people duck across the road in between the traffic to get the bottle of milk that they forgot or whatever it is that they've forgotten from the shop. And so things like supermarkets at the bottom of blocks of flats draw pedestrians into new paths that they might not have taken in the past. And I mean, I think there's other shops at the bottom of apartment blocks that wouldn't really be so risky for pedestrians, like florists and cafes and so on and so forth, that sure, people might jaywalk to all sorts of places, but I think it's supermarkets that are particularly likely to draw people to do maybe risky things when they're in a rush, rushing home and they've forgotten something. So I think I'd like to advocate that councillors vote for this motion. I think it is important we have an action element. I think you would need to wait for about 2 years to do a pedestrian survey because you need to see what impact the supermarket has on pedestrian behaviour, and that probably wouldn't be established in the first 6 months. So.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Booth?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I rise because I'm supporting this notice of motion because I find it to be fairly innocuous. I think that it's the response of community campaign after some treacherous things that happened towards the intersection, and I think that it's to do with signalling that we support the community in their endeavours to see a better outcome. I think that the 0.3 would have probably happened anyway, and it is what has happened as a result of the hideous deaths that have occurred there, so I have no problem supporting it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Bolton, would you be prepared to accept? I'm just wondering whether you'd be happy to have the 2-year bit changed to not more than 2 years, because
no, I totally agree.
I mean, I think to lock it down would be better to leave it open, but actually give it a maximum so that it in fact.
Okay, you happy with that mover?
So
after not more than 2 years.
Within 2 years.
Yeah, within 2 years. Thank you.
Maybe within 2 years. Is that?
Okay.
That allows officers some
it's a second
discretion there.
Yeah, I don't think the time frame makes that much
Okay, fine. All right. Yes.
Sorry.
Just through the Mayor, I just want to make sure it's really clear. So saying within 2 years makes it tighter, must be done before the end of the 2 years. After 2 years means it can happen any time after. So I'm just making sure you're clear about what the impact is of that.
I think that's the intention, and you're happy with that, Councillor Bolton? And you are? Okay, good. So that becomes part of the substantive motion now. All right, do we have any speakers, other speakers? If not, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Next, unanimous?
Yes, please, thank you.
That be listed as unanimous, please. Thank you. The next report to consider this evening is DCI 3418, Fleet Management Policy, response to general business item. And Councillor Martin is on his speak.
Thank you. So I would like to move a slightly amended version of tonight's report. And if I have a seconder, I did circulate this to councillors earlier. If I have a seconder, I'm happy to talk to it.
Okay. So people, you're clear on what you're seconding, Councillor Booth? Fine. Okay.
So just to explain to everyone, point 1 remains the same. Point 2, what it does in essence is it removes the opportunity for the mayor of the day to actually go against the policy. There was some kind of wording that indicated that the mayor might not have to follow the policy. I feel as the mayor of the city, you should have to follow what your staff are following, and so I think that it's reasonable that we ask that the mayor follows the policy. What 12 does is it expands it from passenger to also light commercial, and this is further strengthening our commitment to reducing emissions. What point 4 does is it actually asks that I was wanting to make sure that this fleet policy doesn't drop off. Previously, through the Zuki strategy, we've had issues where we haven't actually known how we've been tracking in our fleet strategy. So what we'll be doing is trying to incorporate that as part of the annual zero carbon emissions strategy reporting. So that's just capturing this so that we have a reporting stream. And what the last point 5 does is it actually takes a look at some of the packaging arrangements that we have at council. I also think that if the mayor and the councillors and the staff are all sticking to a strategy, then there should not be any perverse incentives that encourage potentially some of the staff or executives to actually drive vehicles that are outside of our strategy. So that's what the moving of all of this is doing, and so I'm happy that I've sort of just touched on that. Really what this is, in a nutshell, is when I first got on council, when we first got on council here, the internal policy hadn't been reviewed for 11 years. What I did was called for a general business item. Through that general business item, this report has now come back. I would really like to thank the staff that have worked on this policy, and actually the staff from our environment team as well as the staff from our transport team in strengthening this and actually aligning this policy to what we want to see happen. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this roll out. I'm also looking forward to getting updated on this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Boo.
I just rise to say that I think that Councillor Martin has said everything that needs to be said, and commend the officers and Councillor Martin for working together to really finesse the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers on that? Yes, Councillor Bolton.
I'm not rising to speak again, so I'm rising to speak in favour.
Yes.
I think this is a good move, this motion and this report, because I think sort of drilling down into some of the specifics in order to bring down carbon emissions is really important, because I think it is very important that we not, things not be at a fairly superficial general kind of level. We need to sort of drill down into specific parts of the organisation. So I think this is really good.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? Being no further speakers, we're going to put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. We move on now to DCI 3518, Public Lighting Assessment, Laneway, behind 30 to 32 Heller Street, 18 to 30 Grantham Street, and 2 to 16A Millward Street, Brunswick. Do I have a mover for this report? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Yildiz. Seconded? Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Yildiz?
Riveting, no.
No. Councillor Bolton? No. Okay. There being no further speakers, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Now we move to DCS 4418, Draft Financial and Performance Statements 2017-2018, and this is quite a substantial report. Do I have a mover? Councillor Tapanos. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Martin. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Tapanos?
No, I think I'll pass.
And Councillor Martin.
I'd just like to just rise to actually highlight how well we are actually tracking as an organisation, and the fine work that our officers are actually doing in really what is a brilliant outcome. I would like to highlight a couple of things that are written in the report, and that is that of the unrestricted surplus that we are generating, we're putting $2.5 million of that into the Oak Park Reserve for works on the Oak Park Sports and Aquatic Precinct. And I know many of the councillors here are really looking forward to that precinct, and I should highlight as well that that has been solely funded from council because we got no assistance from the state government on that item. I'd also like to highlight that $500,000 or close to $600,000 will be going to fund the Bonwick Street Fawkner streetscape improvements. So that's a direct investment that we're making in Fawkner. And I'd also like to state that $2.5 million will be putting that into a significant projects reserve, and that is primarily going towards funding our new library and community centre in Glenroy. So I really would like to, again, thank the officers for their work on all of this, and assure members of the gallery and residents that may be watching at home that we are putting this money to good use. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Any other speakers? Being no further speakers, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. We move on now to DCS 4518 Governance Report, September 2018. Councillor Riley, would you like to move?
Yes, please, as it's written. And I'd also like to move an additional motion regarding point 6, which is to do with the Cobert Square Oversight Committee. And I believe the wording's been distributed to councillors, but I might read it for the residents.
Yes, I think it's probably worthwhile.
And the people in the gallery here, that point 6 was now writing it to say that council establishes the Cobert Square Oversight Committee in accordance with the terms of reference in the attachment number 6 to this report, and appoints the Mayor of the day as the chair of that committee, councillors, and also councillors Afanley, Martin and Tapanos, and that council officers holding or acting in the positions of Chief Executive Officer, Director Planning and Economic Development, and Manager places as members, and determines that Councillor Riley, that's myself, will be appointed to fill any vacancies that arise on the committee. So I'm just going to be the backstop.
Right, happy with good. And we have a seconder for that. Councillor Abu. Now, would you like to speak to the report?
Yes, thank you. This report is an omnibus report, if you like, where it covers quite a range of council business, including the committees of council, the assemblies of councillors, and you'll see those records in this report, and you can also access those on the website. The on-notice responses from our August council meeting are in this report, and there's a proposed motion, 2 proposed motions of the Municipal Association of Victoria on the state for their state council meeting in October, and the Human Rights Policy Implementation Update, and of course the Cobert Square Oversight Committee, which I've already referred to. I'll try not to repeat myself about that, except I would just like to highlight the fact that the motions that are going to the MAV, or the Municipal Association, relate to the private building surveyor approvals, and this is aims to increase their accountability and compliance. And the other motion that we're moving is to insert an item which is called inclusionary zoning or other appropriate tool for affordable housing in the Victorian planning provisions. And I'll just quickly explain that a little. The Minister's done some good work. The Federal Minister for Housing and the Planning Minister and the State Government have done some good work around affordable housing and community housing, and they've allowed us as a council and the other 70 plus councils in Victoria to actually do this work. So that means that we can actually do some strategic work and planning, which will take 6, 12, 18 months, a good deal of officer time, good deal of taxpayer money, ratepayer money to get this work done. However, the sentiment behind this is that we'd like the state government just to introduce the rule across the state and have all developers that are doing medium and high density development produce, say, for example, 15 or 20% of affordable housing for those people who can't afford the market rates that we're getting, or in lower density housing that they might provide 5 or 10%. So this would be a rule that would just allow that kind of housing to be introduced in larger developments and smaller developments. This is not new. South Australia's been doing it. It didn't bring the skies down. Developers kept developing, and that state is benefiting from that. And it simply is just getting, Moreland is moving behind this because we're doing this kind of work at a strategic level. We're looking at the inaffordability, the poverty, issues that people are having in housing. It's a really important issue that we have this go up to our state body for councils and actually advocate for it at the state level.
Where's Cobert Square? What is Cobert Square?
Cobert Square is the initiative around, thank you, Mr. Dalby. Just to remind people who are wondering what that is about, Cobert Square has been on the council plan for many, many years to take those car parks near Coles and adjacent to Cobert Station and to improve the whole landscape there, to get new businesses invested in that space, new housing, new development, better public transport integration, and a whole raft of other things, putting some of the car parking underground, opening up open spaces, putting in lots of piazzas and so on, and just seeing Coburg get the kind of treatment it needs. So thank you for clarifying that. I apologise for not doing that earlier. I'll leave it at that.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Boot.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to draw particular attention to attachment 5, which is the implementation update of the Moreland Human Rights Policy, because I'm very proud to say that I'm the chair of the Human Rights Committee, which is a pretty remarkable group of people that incorporates a bunch of other groups as well, including the Disability Working Group, which I've been the council representative to since I was elected to the council in 2016. And I'm informed that for the last 6 years it's only been Greens that have been on that working group, and some of the work that's being brought forward as a result of that work has been really valuable for the community. And
Sorry, I just missed something you said. I couldn't repeat it.
I was just talking specifically about the Disability Working Group. I think that the work of the Human Rights Committee has been really valuable, especially since we've identified when the Human Rights Policy was established, what the groups are that do need specific attention. And so I really wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, because the group has some new blood in it, and so do the subgroups, and there's a whole lot of really important stuff going on, which I'm really proud to be involved in.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers on this? Yes, Councillor Bob.
Yes, I'd like to speak on this report. In fact, it's such a shame that so many things are amalgamated into a report called governance that it's sort of it's hard for members of the public to really, follow what's happening. I'd like to speak about the two motions that Moreland is moving at the Municipal Association of Victoria State Council meeting, because I actually think they are very important. One of them is the one that Councillor Riley already made reference to, which is about, advocating for inclusionary zoning to be mandatory in the planning scheme, in the state planning scheme. If we'd have had mandatory inclusionary zoning, we would have had thousands and thousands of low-cost housing during the period of this building boom. Because at the moment, all councils can do is request, ask, encourage developers to provide low-cost housing, but they have no power to enforce it. The other one that I think is important is about advocating for legislative change to increase the accountability of private building surveyors to ensure compliance of building works they have improved. And this is particularly important. In Moreland, we've got the Anstey building, which had some of the flammable cladding. They had a fire there, and basically those residents have been left holding the baby. So the developers flown the coop or gone bust or whatever, and the developers are now, the residents are now left holding the can to deal with the millions of dollars of reparation works to deal with the combustible cladding. This is really a system that's been brought about through the privatisation of building inspectors all of those years ago in the early 90s. So I definitely think, I'd prefer the motion to go even further, but at least this is a start.
Okay. Any other speakers? Now, I know Councillor Riley has spoken, but there is something that he wants to deal with, and I'll allow that to come in.
Mayor, for the opportunity. I just wanted to further clarify what's happening around the Cobert Square, and just to quickly cover off on some of the reasons why we're forming this committee. And because it is an omnibus item, I was somewhat distracted about some of the other elements of it. So thank you to those who prompted me. But we're really moving to form this committee because Council's got a role in continuing to get feedback and to advocate on behalf of the community benefits around to the level crossing removal authority, and because of the work that's imminently coming along that line. We're also wanting to make sure that we're advocating our approach and seeking to include better outcomes for everyone. And I know we've just had a bit of a discussion about this, so I think it's really important that we do that I make this clear, that we're actually looking to see if we can get some synergies around that work that is likely to come, whether it's elevated rail or below ground, and that we would like to see that the plans we've got happening at Cobert might actually get a bit of a lift from this, and that's why we're forming this committee. And we need to look at things like additional removals of Munro and Reynard Street crossings. We want to look at new and improved open space, new and improved pedestrian cycle links, and a whole of line solution, as everyone, or many people will be aware of. We're looking to get 15 crossings removed from Parkville through to Cobert. We want to see an additional community benefit for our council and the opportunities to get better integration for the LXRA project with our land, and to see that we proactively pursue that. So this committee will have an oversight role. It'll get a chance to discuss the merits, processes, issues and opportunities for any integration opportunities. So I just think it's important for people to see part of the reason why we're forming this, and it's an important part of the plans, and there's still a long way to go, but this is an opportunity for us to actually get some real potential movement in the Cobert initiative, so that we can get some benefits from what's happening with the LXRA project. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. If there's no further discussion, I'm going to put this to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Move on to DSD 2218, summer 2018-2019, sports ground seasonal tenancy allocation, and Councillor Abood is moving the officer recommendation, is it?
Yes.
And seconded by Councillor Yildiz. Okay, would you like to speak to a Councillor Abood?
Yeah, look, we had a briefing on this on Monday night, and I was really impressed to hear, and I've heard a lot lately, about how much women's participation in sport has increased, over the last period since we really made a commitment to it. I think it's 175% that the women's participation has increased by. Part of what is happening with the sports ground allocations is that we're endeavouring to allocate grounds to clubs that have juniors, and there's a few criteria, but the ones that come to mind are juniors and women involved in teams in those clubs. And it was amazing to hear that there are only 11 clubs that are not currently up to scratch where we'd love them to be, but also that 10 of those 11 look like they'll almost definitely arrive. And one of those clubs I know had an evening at the footy ground, which was for girls to come in and have a try of playing AFL. So I think it's really impressive to see that, and I think that the last one on the list is also starting to look like it is also going to be able to get some women and girls playing sport. So I just really wanted to commend the officers that are responsible for this work, and not being somebody who plays competitive sport, but somebody who has little kids who do. I understand how important it is, and how important it is for the community, because it's something that the whole family tends to be involved in. It's been long acknowledged that women have been at the grounds for a long time, and I think now that they're becoming part of the committees and the boards of these teams in a city that supports that kind of thing, it's a really valuable thing for all of the communities, especially sporting communities in the city.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Yildiz, as a seconder.
What I wanted to say was that these clubs are certainly very good clubs, but it wasn't a rash 3-month trial period of go and find some females. They've been given nearly almost 2 years the opportunity to actually go out and recruit. I love both the clubs. I know both the guys that run the clubs, these two in particular. And Pascoe Vale's got a fantastic new facility that's coming up. You think that you've got all this time. Other clubs are recruiting players, and to come back to us and go, well, there are no females. Well, how does Therapanola get, you know, the girls they've got? How do all the other cricket clubs get the? I mean, that's football, but I'm saying with other cricket clubs, they're able to get some players, female players, but they're showing initiative and they're showing commitment to it. I think the biggest issue with this is, and I'm sure that the director will confirm this, is the fact that they haven't actually shown that. They haven't shown the passion to actually go out and recruit. There's no evidence of them going out on social media or doing letter drops or going out to schools and trying to encourage kids to join their Milo program. So I think this is good in a way to say, hey, we're not going to tolerate disengagement of you guys trying to encourage girls to join the club. So good on the officers for doing this.
Thank you, Councillor Ildiz. Any other speakers on this? Being no further speakers, and putting to the vote, all those in favour? Against, declare that carried. Councillor Aboud's on her feet. D for DED 5518.
Yes, please.
Melbourne Airport, 2018 preliminary draft master plan submission. You're moving the officer recommendation?
No, I'm not. I have an alternative recommendation.
Well, I'll get you to do that before I ask for a seconder, just so everyone's clear.
Yep, so it's been circulated and came out of a conversation we had at the briefing on Monday night, but I'll read it, it's up there. Reserves its support, that Council 1, reserves its support for the 2018 preliminary draft master plan for Melbourne Airport until further details relating to the third runway development plan are released to the public, with detail about mitigation for expected risks, not limited to but including increased traffic projections and traffic management plans. 2, endorses the submission to the 2018 preliminary draft master plan for Melbourne Airport at attachment 1 to this report and submits it to Melbourne Airport at the State Planning Minister with the inclusion of a requirement for pre-approved management and offset plans for major development projects such as the development of a third runway. And 3, requests that Melbourne Airport, consistent with their Take 2 climate change pledge, bring forward development of the climate change adaptation and mitigation framework and carbon management plan to inform the runway development program and release these documents for public comment and consultation concurrently with the runway development plan.
And Councillor Martin asked a second, so you may speak to it now.
That's a mouthful. Okay, so there is a 20-year draft management plan, but the climate risk and vulnerability assessment report results have not yet been released to the public. This is of concern to me. There is no detail yet about how expected risks related to future expansion will be mitigated, and I think this includes management of increased traffic with more planes coming in and out. There is, however, a public pledge to support Australia's commitment to the Paris Agreement on climate change. However, the domestic aviation emission regulations and accounting fall under the authority of the federal government. So I don't know if people have been watching the news, but on the 17th of August, it was reported in one of the papers that the Prime Minister of the day had dumped plans to legislate the Paris Agreement emission targets. Now, it's no secret that we have a new Prime Minister, but the current Prime Minister of the day is under mounting pressure from radio shock jocks and Conservative MPs to follow the United States and dump the targets. So I'm very concerned about how that's going to play out. We have a situation in the city where there are areas in the city where planes do go over people's homes, but there's also the broader risk of the increased emissions with more flights in and out of the airport. So I think that rather than just let this slip through, it needs a little bit of particular attention. And I'd like to acknowledge a member of the gallery, John Englert, who's been a real advocate with this sort of thing, and it's really come to my attention in the last couple of days how valuable it is when members of the community are in a position where they're inclined to give information to people on the council with regard to some of these decisions to be made, especially when they're not campaigning or looking for votes. They're just representing the community as they've been elected to do. So I'd like to thank you very much for the information.
Okay, then Councillor Martin is the seconder. You want to speak to it?
Yeah, just briefly. I too share the same concerns that Councillor Abood has just raised, especially around the development of a third runway. I also share the concerns and the impact on our community of Pascoe Vale and Glenroy. Nobody wants a plane landing in their backyard, and I think it's something that we really need as a council to be clear on what this final master plan looks like. And I don't think we should be committing to anything until we've seen all the detail right down to the last dot, because what we don't want to see is huge amounts of air traffic, not only increasing our emissions as a council, but also increasing the noise pollution to residents in our area. So I think it's really important that we withhold our support for the moment until we see further information.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolton.
I was wondering if the mover and the seconder might consider an additional point. That is, notes that the aviation industry is responsible for a very high level of greenhouse gas emissions, and that the expansion of air travel has exacerbated the impact of these high-level emissions. Therefore, Council advocates other levels of government that investment should be focused on the establishment of a very fast train to connect Australia's cities instead of expanding the privately owned airports.
Can I just ask a point of clarification? Who are we advocating to?
Well,
and how is probably my question.
Well, I believe it should be, it probably enters into debate on the amendment. I believe that the council's position and people who support action on climate change should be advocating in Australia for a very fast train rather than permanent expansion of these airports. I think we need to advocate this position to both federal and state governments in various transport forums.
Okay, all right, we've got the picture now. So the mover was Councillor Abood. Is that acceptable?
As has been proven in the past, I have a lot of trouble processing this stuff when I receive an email about it at 7:45 during the meeting. So I suggest that maybe this can come up and advocacy about fast train can happen at some time in the future. So I'd rather not.
But you're not, okay, so as the mover is not accepting it, so, all right. Did you want to put it as a motion?
Oh, well...
You could do that if you wanted, and then we could debate that, then go back to the substantive motion.
Well, if anyone's
you have a
prepared to second it, we can put it as a motion. Otherwise, I can wait and do it as a notice of motion at the next council
That's probably
meeting.
better.
I might do that.
Okay,
but if I could speak to the general motion.
So you'll leave it for the moment? Okay. Yeah, well, that's for the moment, and now you may speak to the motion.
So now may I speak? I'm glad this motion, even though I'm not sure if Moreland Council's had a discussion about very fast train versus airports in the past. But I am very pleased that this alternative motion has been moved that reserves support for the draft master plan for Melbourne, because I have been very disturbed that the airports, which have all been privatised in all the big cities, are basically just commercial organisations that are lobbying governments to expand the airports. And this is a disaster in terms of climate change because of the very intense and high level of emissions as a result of the aviation industry. And now there is a much higher number of people who are flying, who in the past would have never been able to afford to fly, would have caught trains and buses and so forth, and I'm probably in that camp. But I think we desperately need a low emissions form of long distance fast transport that can rival the airports if we're serious about action on climate change. And really all we're doing by supporting the expansion of these airports is not only endangering the climate, but also propping up these businesses, because that's really what they are. They're privately owned businesses that are trying to increase their market share. And I think I've noticed over the last, decade, any discussion of a very fast train between the capital cities has totally dropped off in Australia. It's hardly ever mentioned, and this is really quite an important thing. I'm also aware that the residents in Hume in Gladstone Park have major concerns about the impact of this expansion on not only their area but also on the northwestern area of Moreland.
Thank you. Any other discussion? We haven't actually had a speaker against, so you can't close the debate. No. All right, so if there's no speaker against, no. We'll put the motion then. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. All right, DCI 3618, protected bicycle lanes on Cumberland Road, approval to remove parking. Councillor Riley?
Yes, I'd like to rise to move the officer motion as
and seconded by Councillor Martin. You may speak to it, Councillor Riley, if you wish.
Thank you. This is about protected bicycle lanes on Cumberland Road and seeking approval to remove some of the parking there. I do that reluctantly because parking is one of the words that kind of keeps me awake at night and doesn't really want me to wake up in the morning afterwards because it causes so much differences in our community, and we're going to see that when we get the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy results. By the way, thank you to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of responses to that. You've given officers a headache, but it's good to know that consultation is working. But back to this parking removal. This is about spending state government funds to improve our bike routes. And that's in this year's budget. So it's quite a pleasure to be able to do this. We're trying to link up Glenroy and Cobert with a bike, or make improvements to that bicycle route, which you can see in the report has a map that kind of doglegs its way, so down, depending which way you're riding, either south and east towards Coburg or north and west back towards Glenroy. And this important part of Cumberland Road needs some effective treatment for cyclists. So it covers the Cumberland Road from Eddy Street to Kent Road, and it is in line with the cycling strategy that Victoria has developed and prioritises this as a strategic cycling corridor. So we're really pleased with that. The design allows protected bicycle lanes, sufficient width for a street sweeper, a buffer to keep cyclists outside of the door zone, and a traffic lane width that supports the 513 bus route as well. So the design is in a cross-section there in the report, which you can have a look at. It's important to note that Vic Roads has indicated that they like this result, and it's going to protect, I have to note that it's going to protect our venerable road users. So I'm pleased to know that we're going to have lots of venerable road users protected, and I hope it protects the vulnerable ones as well. So just to come to the parking issue, officers have done an assessment of that. There will still be some on-street parking on one side of the street, but to allow this to occur, we're going to need to remove some. However, all the properties in Cumberland Road have off-street parking, so it shouldn't be such an issue for them, even though some of them have already told us it is. And I understand when change occurs that people don't like it, but there is also not the highest occupancy rate of those car parks on there. It gets up to 41% there during the weekdays, and early in the morning it's only around 13 or 15%. So look, they're very low rates, and there is good off-street parking in the side streets. So I'm hoping that the local community and the residents there will adjust to this, because the benefits that are going to bring to us and the community for active transport, I think, are going to be quite marked. And I'm very happy to move this report, and more than happy to talk to the residents about the impacts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Martin?
Yeah, I rise to speak in favour of this report. I think it's fantastic. I also think it's great that the state government also thinks that it's a good project, and they gave us some money to do this. So I actually thank the state for that one. This is really fantastic because not only does it links up some of the works that we're doing up in Cardinal. We've got the shared path up there. This is going to put the path up Cumberland. It's going to be connecting the Pascoe Vale pool. It's going to be connecting it to the school areas. I would have liked to have seen it go all the way up to Boundary. That would have been nice. Hopefully that's a consideration for the future. I think it would also be nice to talk about consideration for up West Street. There's also plenty of room on East Street as well. But we're really talking about actual investment in the north of the city and connecting it up and really connecting bike lanes that are protected so they're safe for kids to ride to school on. These are really important things that we need in this community, and it's an area which for many, many years was critically underfunded, and it's really great to see a lot of our projects now with a northern focus. So I really look forward to seeing this connect up, and I really look forward to having a ride to school day down O'Hay and up Cumberland and riding all over the place. So it is a really exciting project, and I look forward to seeing it roll out.
Sorry, John. Sorry, through the Mayor, just want to add one more thing, which it's quite important, Mr. Mayor, and I apologise for not mentioning it, which is that officers have advised us that the investments that have been made in the shared path on upfield and or advised myself at least, not to everybody. So this is kind of a bit sensitive because we are a bit concerned and we're seeking clarification around the Cumberland Road monies and the monies on the shared path up to the ring road between Box Forest Road. That's in this year's state budget, and we're really hoping that we can roll it out. However, we're getting some feedback and we're hearing through community members even sitting in the room here that some of this money might be at risk and pushed off into the next financial year. So we're really seeking some clarification about that, and we'd like to spend it this year and make sure it happens. So if anyone can help ensure that happens, we invite them to advocate and make sure that we get that money spent this year. So it's just, I think it's important, Mr. Mayor, that people are aware of that. And if anyone can have any whispers in the right people's ears to make sure that we get that money this year, it's really important because it's big dollars and it's going to have big impacts for the North. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers on this? Being no further speakers, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
Can I call for a division on that one?
A division?
Yes.
It wasn't unanimous? No?
No.
It wasn't. Okay, all those in... Okay, can you raise your hand, those that were in favour?
Just holding it.
Okay.
Don't you?
Hang on. Okay, and against? Okay. All right, we're moving to the next item. DCI 3718, laneway at the rear of 142 O'Hay Street, Cobert. Moved by Councillor Abood. Have a seconder? Councillor Bolton. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Abood?
No.
Councillor Bolton?
No, that's right.
Don't think so. Any other discussion? Being no discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Right, the first notice of motion has been dealt with. We'll move on to the second notice of motion. Notice of motion 3718, Cities with Nature. Councillor Abood. Now, with the notice of motion, if they are as they're printed in the agenda, you don't need to read them. Is yours as it's printed in the agenda?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, do you have a seconder to that motion from Councillor Abood? Councillor Bolton. So, Councillor Abood, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, it's fairly straightforward. So the Cities for Nature was established in June this year. It's basically a place where all levels of government from everywhere can connect and share ideas. I think that Moreland is always working on different ways that we can improve the way that we do this kind of work, as in being a city with nature in it. Our urban forest strategy, the Zuki, the health and wellbeing plan, the waste and litter strategy, the open space strategy, park close to home, our creek and natural resource management policies. all support, and including some of the new intentions we have with regard to some of the planning stuff that we've been doing, all take into consideration how important being a city with nature is. So I think that although there'll be some stuff that we can take on board that will be of great value, I think we actually also have quite a lot to offer. So I think being part of this group is going to be really important for anybody who's concerned with this type of work. That's all I think.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. Would you like to speak to Councillor Bolton?
No, I think it's all been said.
Fine.
I support it.
We're going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. The next notice of motion is from myself. I'm moving the motion. I'm going to move it actually. Do we happy to see? I am. Yep. Regarding the fund event, Enter Carolyn, and I'm moving. Would you happy to second, Councillor Davidson? Just very briefly, it's already written there. Attended an event, a fundraiser for the floods in Kerala. Because of the timing, they weren't able to get free use of the town hall at that time. It was a wonderful event, very, very well attended, and terrific to see all the different Indian and subcontinent groups, including from Sri Lanka and from Pakistan, come together for the raise funds for the floods in Kerala. So I'm requesting that they get free use of the town hall. Did you want to speak to it at all, Councillor Davidson?
No.
Any other speakers? Oh, yes?
I just really want to say something very briefly, because these were very devastating floods, and there are a lot of people, or a number of people in Moreland who would have suffered a lot of personal, like family and friends devastation. There was a large loss of life, and there's a strong connection now between Moreland, especially in the northern part of Moreland, and this region of the world.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people would have lost family members and friends in these floods. So I think that adds the whole event a lot of poignancy, and you know, there's a lot of suffering out there in the community. So I certainly support this motion quite strongly.
Thank you, Councillor. If there's no further discussion, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. We move on to, yes, would you like to, we'll just wait till Councillor Abood leaves, and she's declared a conflict of interest.
Have we got enough numbers?
2, 4, 6, yes, we can't lose anyone else. Okay, so councillors, we're down to quorum at the moment, with the absence of Councillor Abood and Councillor Carly Hannon and Councillor Tapanoff. So if we can, no one, please, if someone cannot leave the room at the moment, otherwise we'll lose quorum. Councillor Riley, you're happy to move. It's as printed in the agenda, is it?
Yes, thank you.
And do we have a seconder? Yep, Councillor Martin.
So I'm rising to move the notice of motion around the investigation of the feasibility of a joint use library in Fawkner, including the possibility of relocating the Fawkner Public Library into the John Fawkner College Library. And this has arisen out of some of the pressures and the work in that area to look at synergies in supporting the community and ensuring that we get a really good resources for now and into the future. And this report is just asking for a feasibility study to be conducted into really look at the veracity of this and see whether it actually has got possibilities and likelihood of success for both the community and the John Fawkner College community as well. So there are 3 parts of the motion. One of it also seeks to get Victorian Education Department of Training and Education Minister to support this financially as well. So that's not hoping that we don't have to take on all of this at the moment, and I'm hoping that that'll be viewed favourably by the Minister for Education, and that we undertake this because it's important that the college doesn't do this on their own. It's a big investment that actually be undertaken by somewhat of a separate or arm's distance to the college, and look at the benefits for both and the risks to both communities if we do this. So the study does involve spending some money, and we'll look at the how we do this in our budget processes for next year. So it's not committing the money now, it's committing in principle to doing the work, and then we work out through the budget process how we actually fund that work, and hopefully the state government will assist us as well. So I commend the motion as is written.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, would you like to speak?
No, thank you.
No. There's no further speakers. I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Next is a motion has been submitted by Councillor Martin. Is it as printed in the agenda?
Yes, it is.
Yes, okay. So Councillor Martin is moving what's printed in the agenda. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Yildiz, thank you. And Councillor Martin.
Yep, so firstly I'd like to just really acknowledge the work that our counterparts over in Darebin have done in this space. They are really trailblazers in this area and in recognising this as a really important issue and really allowing us to learn from them in the process. What we're asking for, and as leaders in our community, we're aware of the impact that climate change is having on our environment, and we are aware of the imminent threat that it poses to not just our food systems, but our health and the health and well-being of the most vulnerable members in our community. And I really actually would like to thank Councillor Tapanos for sending me the definition the other day of the word emergency, because what it does, the definition of the word emergency is a dangerous situation requiring immediate action. And the synonyms of emergency are crisis, urgent situation, and extremity. And these are things that we are recognising and we are seeing in our community right now. We have beaches down on the Great Ocean Road that are eroding week by week. We have bleaching of our Great Barrier Reef. We have bushfires in the middle of winter. We recognise that we're having more and more intense heat waves. We're having flooding. These things are happening to us, and we are aware of it. We are aware that we are at an ecological tipping point, and that we have a limited amount of time to act. Now, as council, we have taken quite a lot of action in this area, and I acknowledge the work that we've already done in this space and our ongoing partnership with the Moreland Energy Foundation, which enabled us to have our zero carbon evolution strategy. The other work that we have done, including the urban heat island effect, food systems, procurement, divestment, water map, waste and litter, integrated transport, cooling communities, and urban forest strategies, these are all steps that we are taking to mitigate the effects of what is a climate emergency. So I really implore my fellow councillors here today to actually stand with us and stand with Darebin and stand with now a number of cities across the world that are recognising that we are at this point, we are at a climate emergency. And I just would like to finish with the one quote that is actually written in our Zero Carbon Evolution Plan, and that is from Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, and that is, "We are the first generation to be able to end poverty and the last generation that can take the steps to avoid the worst impacts of climate change." So, councillors, I implore you to support this motion.
Okay, before I move to the seconder, just a reminder that councillors that we need to stick to the topic and not personalise it too much. Thank you. Councillor Yildiz.
That's right.
Yeah, right. Okay. Councillor Abu.
Thank you. So, this is not just a local problem. This is a problem for the whole planet. And the implications for each of us not doing anything is like when there's a big demo at the city and you think to yourself, I might not go. And then you remember that if you're not the only person that decides not to go, nobody goes and nothing gets done. So I'd like to draw attention to something that really struck me, because I'm kind of concerned with how farming happens, which is that right now, probably tomorrow night, as Hurricane Florence, which is being billed as the strongest storm to ever make landfall, with winds of up to 209 kilometres per hour, has caused over 1 million people and their mobile homes to be evacuated from the path of this storm. It's caused the largest pig abattoir in the world to be evacuated and closed down. That employs 4,500 people. So they're not working today. They're not, the pigs, last time a storm hit this area, the dead pigs were floating down the river. This storm is expected to go over 6 nuclear power plants. It's expected to drop 600 millimetres of rain over industrial waste sites, pits holding coal ash and huge lagoons full of animal waste. If this is not an environmental emergency, then we probably haven't grasped the idea of emergency at all. I couldn't come to terms with this at all, but this figure says 2,500 billion, which is how many cubic metres of ice have melted in the last 25 years, and half of that ice melted in the last 12 years. What's happening is storm surges are hitting the Antarctic, where the floating ice is gone. They're hitting the ice shelves and they're fracturing the ice shelves, causing the glaciers to be able to reach the water quickly, which is resulting in sea rise. Now, back to the local level, I have friends who live in Tathra. In the last 6 months, they've had to evacuate and be on a watch and alert alarm. One of those episodes happen in the middle of winter. I have friends who live in Canberra that are just resigned to the fact that it just doesn't rain there anymore. All through New South Wales, farming communities are collapsing because there is no rain. They're rediscovering stuff that hasn't been taken into account and needs to be addressed again, like burying grain, like burying hay so that they can dig it up and feed it. You know, lambs are being born, you know, a sheep is having 2 lambs, but it can't support either of the lambs, and the lambs are having to all be taken away and be babysat by a boy who's at boarding school, because who would stay on a farm when farms are in drought? The whole system is collapsing, and if this is not an emergency and we don't do something, then I don't know what it looks like.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Councillor Tapanos. Right, a reminder to you as well, sir.
After hearing my fellow councillors, I must admit I'm a little bit scared about the impending disaster and emergency. We're hearing that pigs are floating down the river, lambs are needing to be cared for by others. This is the nature of the debate,
yes, it is. I know. Okay.
The nature of the debate that's occurring, and it is frightening stuff, and it's quite scaring stuff, and we should all be so concerned. But I'm wondering, what are we actually doing about it? Because it seems to me this motion not to have much substance at all. It's a declaration, and that's all. At least our counterparts in Darebin actually had a conference. So, I mean, if I've ever seen a feel-good motion in this chamber, this must certainly be one, where we can get up here and make this drastic declarations of emergency. The world is collapsing, but yet all that we are seeking for is a declaration. A declaration. Surely, Mr. Mayor, that this motion should at the very least be calling for an update of our municipal emergency management plan. Now, that is the management plan that we undertake emergency response to. Surely, if all these things are a dire need in our city, we can effectively indicate through our emergency management plan that we need to take drastic action, inform ambulance, fire stations, local authorities, services and police. This is what the declaration of emergency will do. On the contrary though, what we should be doing, and what we are doing, and thank you for bringing it to my attention, because it's already on the agenda 2 and 3 times already today alone, is implementing those policies that we've already spoken about, our carbon reduction policies, investing real money into local change, solar panels, planting more trees. It is these motions that I want to be debating this late at night, the ones that actually do things, not just bland declarations of emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Did you want... Yes, Councillor. Councillor Rowley.
After attending the conference today and with expecting our Spark conference to happen next week, it's quite evident we are doing things, and this motion is intended to try and reframe the situation, and obviously it brings out some passion in us and gets emotional reactions. And in fact, we had psychologists for Safe Climate today talking to the conference about that, and we had some excellent communications people talking about how we can frame that and how we can work with some of those issues. So it's inevitable that's going to happen when you start to touch on these things. I think we have got much of the foundations, we are doing this kind of work, and we're trying to reframe it a bit because we have the United Nations already saying to us that after 2 years of, since the Paris Agreement, the United Nations own environmental program put it like this: to date, we failed. And if you look at David Spratt, one of the other speakers today, he talked about the Paris text being a political fix, and this is where some of the passion gets into it, because we're actually, you look at all of the emission reduction commitments from all of the voluntary national commitments that have been declared so far, we're on a path to 3.4 degrees of warming, when we know that Paris was meant to say that we're getting to 2 or significantly under 2. And that would happen by 2100. That's only a couple of generations away. We're already, nearly to 2020. And that, more than 5 degrees is a high-end risk, and includes carbon cycle feedbacks taken into account. So it just kind of gets worse. And as I said earlier tonight, really we should be sticking to around about 0.5 degrees of warming as an ideal level of warming that humans and other species can live and thrive in. So as much as this is a word or a title and it's a reframing, it is important to do that, because I think the way we communicate and engage with our own community is essential. And I'm not saying we aren't doing it. I think we are. We've got a lot of leaders here. Some of them are in the room tonight, and many of them are in the room today at the Northcote Town Hall. And when we put this up on the display board, it got an ovation from the audience. Now, obviously, that's preaching to the converted, but those people have read and very concerned, and they're passionate about it, and they would like to see Moreland line up with Darebin in terms of the framing of this. And I think we're both doing good work in that area. Both councils are competing around it, and I just would like to encourage that we could actually do that as well, to actually really give a sense of the importance and the need to act now and to build on what we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bolton.
Well, in response to Councillor Tapanos, if this was all we were doing, changing a few words, then yeah, sure, that wouldn't make any difference. But the intent of this is for action to go hand in hand with signing this climate emergency declaration. And in fact, even beyond the impact on the climate and people and other living animals that have been mentioned by other people in the chamber so far, there's also even the fact that can we afford, like financially as a community, afford to deal with all of these disasters, hurricanes beyond what we've experienced before, bushfires which are of a scale that we haven't seen before, like things are at a much higher scale. And there has been, in the media, very little linking between these disasters and droughts and climate change. So I'm definitely in support of this motion. I think it's a signal of the direction we want to go in. I think there are other things we need to do in addition to this, which will go hand in hand along with this. So I'm certainly in support of it. I don't think it is just a motherhood statement. I've been very opposed to just motherhood statements on council, and I think this signals more than that, and it's up to us to put the more into the climate emergency acknowledgement.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton.
Seeing I seconded the motion, everyone spoke. I thought
you did get a chance, but
yeah, exactly. But it's self-explanatory. I mean, it is making a statement. But if we didn't get up and do this tonight, I think we'd be doing us injustice, because as a council, we reflect a lot of what's in the motion to start with. So I mean, I think Councillor Martin mentioned the other councils, but we in particular are champions in this space. So whether we make this statement or not, it's just self-explanatory. I mean, I don't know why we need so much debate on something that makes us, puts us on the map for the right reasons, but also it's about our future generations. If we can't start eating and breathing this and acknowledging this in everything that we do, I don't think we're going to have a planet. You know, you mentioned, Councillor Abood mentions I saw it yesterday on social media, how the hurricane was about to make inroads, and I went, oh my God, just imagine living in that. I mean, we've got, you know, the last 10 years has been the hottest it's ever been in the last 100 years. We need to respond to this, and if we're not all, as a council, especially standing up to this, then we're doing the community, we're doing the world injustice, I believe, because this is a massive statement for us as a council, which we're only a dot on the map, to be making this. It's not a motherhood statement. I think this is very important, and I congratulate Councillor Martin yet again. Well done.
Okay, any other speakers?
Mr. Mayor, can I move an amendment then, an additional dot point, if it's acceptable to the mover, considering I've heard the need for this and the passion around the chamber, that we add a dot point to amend our municipal emergency management plan to reflect this statement tonight.
Just before I ask if that's acceptable, can I get a comment from the CEO?
Just through the Mayor. The Municipal Emergency Management Plan is really about how the different services get together in the event of a specific municipal emergency. They may come as a result of climate change or other cause. I'm sort of hesitating about it because its purpose is a different purpose. And just looking at the director as well, who looks after that, similarly, its purpose is different. It's very much about the operations of what our response is when an event occurs, regardless of whether it's created by one factor or not. So it's hard for me to advise anything other than that.
Do you still want to go on with it?
Yeah, I do, because from what we're hearing around the chamber, there is clearly a need to address natural disasters.
We're not debating it. I'll just see if it's acceptable to the mover and seconder. Is it acceptable to the mover and seconder?
No, it's not.
Okay, okay.
Where's the action?
Okay, okay.
Maybe there's just
Now, your other option is to find a seconder to the motion and then we'll debate that and then come back to the substantive if you want, or you could let it lapse.
Well, is there a seconder?
Well, it's not acceptable to the original movement. Does Councillor Tapanos have a seconder for his amendment? Therefore, it lapses. Thank you. All right, so we go back to the substantive motion, and I think, did you want to close the debate? Or you have
I can just say briefly, just
to make sure we stick to the debate.
Yes, I just want to highlight for those in the gallery who are watching, point 2 highlights to receive a briefing from officers on how best to act on the climate emergency acknowledgement and to ensure that it is embedded into future strategies and in the next council action plan. So what we're actually doing is recognising that Darebin has the climate emergency plan, recognising that Moreland is already doing plenty of fantastic work in that space. But what we need to do is we actually need to work with our officers to actually work out, well, how do we do this? How do we best mitigate this problem? And I really do thank the councillors in this room for their enthusiasm to act on this emergency and really look forward to the unanimous support in the chamber to actually develop further climate emergency plans.
Thank you, Councillor. That closes the debate. I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Didn't go far enough.
You're voting in favour?
Oh, I always was in favour. I said didn't go far enough, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry. I apologise. And against? Yeah, thank you. Can be recorded as unanimous, please? Thank you. Right, we move to notice of motion 4118, Sydney Road Community School. Just before I ask Councillor Abood to get, Councillor Tapanos has asked that I recognise Gil Friedman and Bill Hannon, who are the co-founders of Sydney Road Community School, who I believe are watching on live stream. Thank you.
Does that then put a conflict for me though? Does that? No. Okay, good.
No. Oh, that's your
my
grandfather.
Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry.
As long as it's not in the motion.
No, it's not. That's not a conflict. Sure. Sorry. I didn't realise that connection. Apologies. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I've kind of... Okay,
So
so...
it's the motion that's been printed before us?
Yeah, there's an additional 0.6, which you've got, haven't you?
On the screen.
Oh, good. Happy times.
Okay, all right.
So did you want me to read the whole thing or just the
No, just the 0.6, please.
Okay, so an additional 0.6 which reads, acknowledges A, the former Wesleyan Sunday School and Church Complex, the site currently occupied by Sydney Road Community School, is of state historical and architectural significance. B, the church is of exceptional quality and integrity and is the first in an important series of polychrome churches designed by Percy Oakden and is an early example of decorative polychromatic architecture in Melbourne. The use of blues cream bricks is locally important, particularly in this building where Glue was an active member of the congregation. And C, the Sunday School derives additional significance from its innovative planning.
Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Aboud and Councillor Yildiz. Did you want to second it? Yes.
Yeah.
Councillor Yildiz. Okay, would you like to speak to it, Councillor Aboud?
Yeah, I would. So many words. The school is a small government-funded school which has operated since 1972, and I didn't realise about your grandfather, but that's quite remarkable, Liv. It provides a very unique educational experience for young people with very specific needs who may miss out on education without this facility in the city. There's about 100 kids at the school. The feel of the building is remarkable. It's a panopticon, but not like the one that exists over there. It's got this beautiful atrium in the middle, and then all of these little odd-shaped rooms that look down into the centre of the building. I went to the school. I've been to the school a couple of times recently, and the second time I was there to have a conversation. Well, to take part in what was billed as a mini TED talk. So a few of us had some speeches, but I got to actually kind of have a bit of backwards and forwards with some of the kids as well, because we just kept talking about some of the stuff that I'd brought up. And it was quite remarkable to connect with some of these incredible young people about their experiences and their perception of, the way the world is. Quite often teenagers are just completely disengaged and don't bother having a conversation, but I think that these kids really were up for it, and it was really impressive for me. The school is located on a site which is leased. So the lease is due to expire in the next few years, and I think that the time is right to really make mention of how important it is for the whole city, considering the diversity of people who live in the city and how everybody has a right to education. And I'm hoping that we can contact the Education Minister either now or of the day or both to explain and, really emphasise how important the school is to the city and try to get a commitment to find a suitable permanent site for the school. So I hope that everybody around the council will support the motion, and I think there's more detail in each of the points. It's quite concise.
Thank you. Councillor Yildiz?
Just very quickly, Natalie and I went to the school last week, and Mel invited us to have a quick look around. I taught BCAL for a couple of years, so what this school's doing with those BCAL kids is absolutely remarkable. Mel, the teachers, I forgot the principal's name, but he's...
Ralph.
Yep, they're extremely engaged with the kids. They are, no doubt. There's some of those kids that are challenging. What was interesting is there was a dog at the school, and I asked, I said, what's the role of the dog? And the dog's so smart that it's able to pick a child that's maybe going through some emotional issues, and the dog will make its way over to that student and will actually literally stand beside the student. And I just thought, wow, what that's remarkable. But there are a whole range of other things that the kids have produced that I thought some of these kids need to be in mainstream classrooms, but they're not, and for various reasons. But I think we as a council, if we can, I like this motion, if we can certainly write a letter at least to the Minister to acknowledge the fact that these guys are a little bit tentative at the moment, thinking that Beyond 2023, they may not have a school. It's going to be years of planning, but yeah, we got to speak, didn't we, Natalie? And students are extremely smart. In fact, some of them were so politically astute, they were giving us advice. So really impressed, and I'm supporting this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Udez. Any other speakers? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, I would like to speak on this. I mean, I find it remarkable that a school like this is under threat, like that it doesn't already have a secure place, and it's not guaranteed by the state government. So I find that really quite extraordinary. I visited the school, I think it was last year, and what was evident to me is, you know, there are some students who, for various reasons, such as anxiety, who can barely leave the house. They can't attend a school generally, and they've been sort of gradually coaxed back into the school system by having access to a school like this. And so I think this school plays quite an extraordinary role. There's very few schools like this. I think there might be one in North Melbourne or Kensington as well, but there are very few schools like this that cater for kids that really can't make it in the mainstream school system. So I definitely think we should strongly support, you know, do whatever we can to support this school.
Yeah. Just wanted to point out, those that don't know where the school is, Savers in Brunswick, right next door to it.
That's right. Yep. All right, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to put this to the vote now. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Unanimous it was? Yep. It is unanimous. Okay, notice motion 4218, investigating the impacts of sugary drinks and options for council to better respond. It's a motion by Councillor Riley. Is it as it's printed in the agenda, Councillor Riley?
With a slight amendment to
yes.
point B. So after Vic Health's recommendations, there was a full stop. It's now going to have "and which lead to improved diets and healthier communities across the municipality." This should include actively seeking advice from expert bodies such as the Sports Dietitians Association.
Okay, and everything else stays the same. Do we have a second? Councillor Davidson.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor Davidson. So this is, I'm just wanting to move this notice of motion because we are already doing some good work in this area around health and diets and so on, but this is to build upon that, and ostensibly it really is starting to explore some of the issues that are kind of touched upon in point B, which really gets to the heart of some of the promotional and marketing issues where some of these drink companies and or sponsors start to conflate with our sporting bodies and so on. So it is a bit of a difficult area, and the intention of this is to start to unravel that a bit and start to deal with it for the benefit of our community, because the data is all going in the wrong direction, unfortunately, in terms of obesity and participation and health activity rates for some parts of the community. Obviously, there are many parts of the community that are doing that, and some of our sporting bodies are getting good results of that, but it's not even across the community. So we need to look at the different pockets of the community that aren't actually getting the benefits that they should be from good diets and good sport activities. So this is trying to unpack that a bit further in some of the data that we're gathering, some of the work we're already doing. So it's to try and build on that and to fit in with our Moreland Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, and it's to line up with the reporting of that strategy. So hoping the office, this is not going to be too much of a burden for officers, but it's to start to, as I said, explore and unpack some of that work. So I hope the motion is supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson, would you like to speak to him?
I'd really like to thank Councillor Riley for bringing this motion to Council. I'd also like to talk about point B as well. I think that it is very broad, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that it will encourage us to have, particularly in relation to our sporting grounds and our council events and what we are trying to promote through healthy eating and healthy drinking. I did notice that with our Moreland Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, the points that are referenced in there on page 298 are in relation to eating and they don't reference drinking. So hopefully we can incorporate the element of drinking and consuming sugary drinks into our plan as well in the future. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the report that comes back, and I think the work is going to be well worth the result for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. Any further discussion? Being no further discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay, we've already dealt with the next one, so we move on to Notice of Motion 4418, Support for Status Resolution Support Services, and that's a motion put forward by Councillor Abu. Is it as printed in the agenda?
Yes, yeah, it is.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Yildiz. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor
Yeah, just briefly. I really want to actually commend the City of Greater Dandenong for putting this stuff forward and recruiting interested councils to support this joint statement about raising awareness and lobbying the federal government against changes to the status support resolution services. So basically the status support resolution services are for people who are seeking asylum, and they are already starting to wind back what was $35 a week to zero for single people, with the intention that those people would be supported within the community. Now, anybody who's seeking asylum or supporting somebody seeking asylum is probably already really stretched in terms of what resources are available, and that includes some of the service providers. You know, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre is reporting now that they're having to triage people when they arrive there rather than being able to give them the support that they need, and that's material aid, but also every other kind of support that you need when you're in that kind of situation. There's a really dire need for a really effective collaboration between all levels of government to make sure that the support that people seeking asylum is available for them. So I'm hoping that this council will agree to endorse the joint statement and pledge the funding, which is up to $5,000 to run a consolidated campaign rather than each of the different councils be involved in running smaller campaigns. The idea was to get together, and I also feel quite proud. This work has already happened. I've been going to these meetings since July the 31st. It's called the Local Government Mayoral Roundtable, but there's actually quite a lot of different offices and other council laws and some there. So it's a really good collaboration of a whole bunch of different people with, you know, first-hand experience about what is required and can be done, and the impacts of what happens when this stuff is being wound back. There's also expected to be more cuts in the future, and I think that it'd be really great if we could formalise our support for this work.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. And the second, Councillor Yildiz, did you want to speak to it? Okay. Yes, Councillor Bolton.
I would like to speak to it because I think this is a really, really important motion. This is starting to and will cause absolute devastation, what the government is doing. The federal government is trying to starve asylum seekers, basically. I mean, that's really what it is. And it'll be devastating for asylum seekers, but also devastating for the various charities and various organisations trying to support asylum seekers. It will have an impact on councils, just looking at the purely economic element of stretching resources and dealing with increased homelessness and increased number of people in all of our municipalities who don't have any money whatsoever to live. I mean, people are already only on a percentage of the New Start allowance, and we all know that New Start allowance is impossible to live on. So, I mean, I just think this is the most, you know, what the federal government's doing here is the most nasty and cruel thing possible. And I'm really pleased that the City of Dandenong has sort of tried to bring the councils together. I don't know how many councils, maybe in your right of reply you can mention how many councils are involved, because, you know, I think we do need to group together to basically try and put the pressure on the federal government to reverse this really terrible decision.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Did you know how many councils are involved?
Yeah, there's actually 3 bands of support. So there's obviously the councils that are impacted quite significantly and have made a commitment are Yarra, Darebin, Moreland. And then there's another band of support which is, and Dandenong obviously. And then there's another band of support which is has a different level of involvement. But there's also some regional councils that are involved, like I think the city of Greater Geelong and Mildura come to mind, where there's opportunities for scenarios where inner councils and regional councils can work together to try and flesh out what opportunities there are for, you know, support in outer councils. But it did come to my attention that I don't think Hume Council has signed up yet, and I'm looking forward to hearing back about whether they're interested in joining, because I know that there are quite a lot of asylum seekers that are based in Hume because a lot of the cultural groups are there. So I think there's still scope for more groups to join, but I'm really pleased that we've been involved since the beginning.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Now we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. Okay.
That be recorded as unanimous?
Yes, happy to record as unanimous. Okay, just before I call for any foreshadowed items, I've just received an email informing me that Council has won an award for civic leadership tonight in the Victoria's Multicultural Awards of Excellence. It recognises government bodies for major initiatives that meet the needs of culturally, linguistically and religiously diverse communities. Moreland was announced as a winner tonight. Council was recognised as one of the few councils in Australia to adopt a social cohesion plan, and our work in support of Faulkner Neighbourhood House, which is, so we congratulate Faulkner Neighbourhood House as well, to deliver a range of products for marginalised communities and including them in community life and ample employment opportunities. So both Moreland Council and particularly Faulkner Neighbourhood House, I congratulate them on the award. Well done. All right, foreshadowed items. Does any councillor have any item to foreshadow for next council meeting? Yes, Councillor Riley.
I want to just foreshadow that I've been, in some of the work I've been doing around, can I say the P word again? Parking, that actually it's not actually parking, but it is to do with intersections and bikes and pedestrians, the P word pedestrian, that I'm looking to have a report come, to seek a report as a notice, through a notice of motion around the black spots and our priority areas for pedestrian and bicycle crossings. Been doing quite a bit of work in the south of the city, particularly around John Street and Ewing Street and the Glen Lyon Road intersections. Yep. And we are doing some good work there, and there are some plans there, and we're engaged with the community, and we'll try and continue to do that. But I just think it's important for us to have the framework, and the community needs to see where our real black spots are, the really, really black spots, as opposed to the not so hot ones. So I'm just, that's the notice that I'm looking to draw out.
Yep. Councillor Abood?
Yeah, I'd like to foreshadow that I'm working on a notice of motion regarding bees in the city. No. I don't think I'll go into the detail, but we just wanted to flesh out some more of what we needed to know about making sure that the notice of motion makes sense, but also that unless Councillor Bolton does it beforehand, I'm interested in a notice of motion regarding advocacy for high-speed rail. So maybe we could work on that together.
Okay. Anyone else from the side of the table?
Well, yeah, I was planning to do that as per what I was tempted to move earlier.
Okay, thank you. All right, now urgent business. For members of the gallery and those watching at home, an urgent business item is an item that's arisen since the distribution of the agenda and which cannot be deferred until the next council meeting. Councillors, we have an urgent business item for consideration, DCI 13818, Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy Public Consultation Forum, which has already been distributed to you earlier. I'd like to call for a motion to admit this item for consideration and then open to debate. So to put it onto the agenda, moved by Councillor Abood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any discussion on that? Sorry?
What the purpose of why it's an urgent business item?
Okay. I was going to do that if it was accepted. Okay.
Is that the briefing?
It's concerning the number of applications that were received for the public submissions for the public consultation for the Moreland Integrated Transport System. We received 158 submissions. We had originally said that people would have 3 minutes to submit. This proposal is saying to postpone that and to arrange a whole series of meetings to allow people to present and delegate the Chief Executive Officer to be able to do that. Because if it's held on the 19th of September as planned, and we'll have 158 submitters on the same night, and we realise that's probably not practical. So that's basically the purpose of it. Not to stop submissions, they'll still have an opportunity to submit, but to arrange different times and to spread it out over a period of time. Okay, so I've got a motion by Councillor Abood and seconded by Councillor Martin to submit this onto the agenda at this point. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. So the motion that DCI 13818 Moreland Integrated Transport Public Consultation Forum does meet the criteria. Okay. Yes. Would you like to move the recommendation? Yeah. Okay, so note that Councillor Bolton hasn't had a chance, so can everyone have a look at what's proposed up there, please, on the screen? And then I'll call for a seconder. Anyone feeling comfortable enough to second? Thanks to Councillor Martin. Yeah. Did you want to speak to it, Councillor Booth?
Yeah, sure do. So I'm absolutely thrilled that we've had so many submissions and that people are keen to talk to them, because I'm often banging on about consulting, and I was involved in the work, which I keep calling public participation, community engagement, which as challenging as it was, I found really rewarding. And so I'm looking forward to putting my money where my mouth is and showing up to hear what people have to say. The other reason I'm really interested in these submissions is because I wasn't at the meeting where the draft was put, and I think that there will be some contention about some of the things that were removed both ways, and I'm interested in hearing what everybody thinks about it. So I'm really excited about hearing all of the submissions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Martin?
Just wanting to point out that we received over 800 online submissions. So really is a fantastic effort from the community in actually not only just reading the strategy, but letting us know their thoughts. And I am really looking forward to listening to and hearing the community's thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I apologise. That's correct. 156 people have asked to be heard to have their submission heard. So, out of 800 submitters. All right. I think we're clear to put it to vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Could I have a motion to close the council meeting to the public in accordance with section? Thanks, Councillor Davidson and Councillor Martin. Could I put that to the vote? All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. I now declare the council meeting closed to the public. I'd like to thank the gallery attendees and also thank those watching on live streaming for your interest in council, and respectively request that you leave the chamber. I wish you all a good night. So we're at 9:50.